Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. The identity crisis and identity thieves. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we got to get into this content. It's very relevant for what's going on today. Who's having this identity crisis? And who are these identity thieves?
Every single Israeli prime minister has a fake name. Did you know that? When I show you what I'm about to show you, your mind will be blown. You're going to be blindsided. Every single Israeli prime minister has a fake name. Did you know that? I was just talking about Ben Gurion. Do you know what his original name is? It's Grun, Gruen. He changed it to make it sound more Jewish and sound more Middle Eastern. Do you know what Netanyahu's real name is? It's not Netanyahu, it's Milkovsky.
This story begins in October 1949, 1 year after Israel's formation. This is when Netanyahu was born, the second child of a historian. His paternal grandfather was a rabbi and a Zionist writer. His name was Nathan Milikowski. Later in life, he Hebraized his surname from Milikowski to Netanyahu, a name which means God has given.
This is Yair Netanyahu's DNA test that has been leaked. You can see right there, his Y DNA is RM198. Descendants of RM198 come from Poland, Russia, Germany, and other European countries. Does this look Semitic to you? Does this look Middle Eastern?
Maybe you will ask, who is Mr. Milkovsky?
I did ask, and you told me, but I didn't know before.
He is Benjamin Netanyahu. This
So
is
the
the real name.
Prime Minister or President of
of
Israel.
the colonial settler state of Israel.
I swear to God, go and look it up. You'll find Milkovsky. That's his real name. These are, remember what Israelis are. Israelis are European Jews. They don't come from Palestine, but they want you to make you believe. They want to make believe and make you believe that they come from this area, that they are indigenous to the land, that they're so Jewish, right? Even though they have no connection. So they change the names.
Where are those people? They weren't all around the world. They were carried. You couldn't travel all around the world very easily in that era. You made it just a little ways away, and many of them made it into what would later become Arab land.
It's a pretty lousy 2,000 years, pogroms, Holocaust, but about 150 years ago, secular Jews, primarily Herzl, Jabotinsky, and others, took the initiative. Let's come back to our own homeland. The Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel.
And then he's saying that these are the indigenous people. We know that they're not. He's saying that Herzl, who was an Austrian, took the initiative to go back to the homeland. But what we know is that there were periods of time it's not common now to convert to Judaism, but there were periods of time where there were massive conversions to Judaism. For example, the Romans, during the Roman times, there was quite a bit of conversion to Judaism. Take into consideration, 10% of their population was Jewish. Many of them had converted to Judaism. Compare that to the United States, where the population of the Jewish population here is like 4% or something really small. So in the Roman times, and this is actually the second largest hub of Jews outside of Israel, is here in the United States. So there was a lot of Romans who converted, including Roman elites like Queen Helena and Nero converted to Judaism. Nero. There was also mass conversion within the Roman Empire itself. We also know that there was a lot of other conversions that happened with the Khazars, for example, the Khazarian Empire, which takes up modern day Ukraine, parts of Russia, not Czechoslovakia. Let me pull up the map here. The various different, so pretty much, Georgia, Russia, and Ukraine predominantly is where the Khazar Empire was. and Herzl and many of the early Zionists came from that region. They're Austrian, Russian, coming from that region, where we know that there was later on, many years after any of these biblical stories, there was a lot of conversion to Judaism. Many people assert that Herzl and many of the Ashkenazi Jews that come from these Eastern European areas are actually descendants of converts.
Here's another one. Moshe Sharat, his name is Chertok originally. You've got Levi Eshkol. Eshkol was Shklonik. So he changed it from Shklonik to Eshkol. Then you have Yigal Alon, his original name, Peikovitz. Golda Meir, Israel's first female prime minister. Her real name is not Golda Meir, it's Mabovich. Mabovich. More like Maj. We have Yitzhak Rabin, right? His name is not Rabin, it's Rubitsov. Are you seeing the pattern? These are Eastern European names, not Palestinian, not Jewish, not Middle Eastern. They're Eastern European, okay?
You can convert to Judaism. You can't convert to a blood family. You cannot convert to a race. Judaism is a religion. That's all it is.
They're not Palestinian. They don't come from this region. Yitzhak Shamir. He's a great one. You know, Yitzhak Shamir, he's on the wanted poster because he was wanted by the British police in Palestine for terrorism. But they don't tell you that. So Yitzhak Shamir, his original name is Yezernitsky. Yezernitsky. Shimon Peres, Persky. Netanyahu, I already told you, Malikovsky. I think I said Milkovsky, excuse me, it's Malikovsky. Never, you know, it's the same point. Ehud Barak is Brog, so B-R-O-G, Brog. He changed it to Barak. Ariel Sharon, his original name is Shinerman. Shinerman. He changed it to Sharon. And Yair Lapid, who's you still see him changing posts, his original name is Lampel, so he changed it from Lampel to Lapid. Ain't it lovely? Ain't it lovely? You know, it's like I know half of you didn't know this. I guarantee half of you at least didn't know this stuff. I guarantee you, because no matter how much you know about the Zionists, you will always discover new things about them.
Professor Lasky, you had mentioned before, obviously, the Khazars and the king and the nation that converts in the Khazari to the Jewish religion. What is the historical support? There's been so many novels, so many books on the Khazars and the Khazar and the empire and et cetera, et cetera. What's the historical support for that whole story?
Okay, I'd say the world's knowledge about the Khazars started in the 10th century when Chasai ibn Shaprut, who was the sort of foreign minister of Abdul Rahman III, the Caliph, the Umayyad Caliph of Andalusia, of Muslim Spain, heard from travelers that there was this nation in Central Asia, the Jewish nation. He wrote a letter and received to the king and asked what's going on. He received a letter back. This is from a king of the time named Yosef, who explains what I said before about the king's search for for the true religion. It is true that many people over the years have doubted the historicity of the letter. There has a question of whether it's just the king and the royalty or the nobility that converted or everyone converted. We don't have any literature as such from the Khazars. However, in the past, I'd say 50 years or so, more and more research has substantiated the letter from Yosef. There's some of the descriptions of the Khazar life and the Khazar history seem to be substantiated from other sources. Coins were found mentioning the name Moses. A letter was found in the Genizah, which might have some Khazar writing or Khazar names in it. And therefore, even though there are still people who doubt to this day that Khazars actually became Jewish, I would say that the I follow those experts who say definitely there is a historical basis. Now, according to the Khazari, the conversion was in the year 740 of the Common Era. Most historians date it to the 9th century, in the 800s.
We know that every single Israeli government has always been headed by, and the cabinet has been filled by people who are Ashkenazi. They're not Semites. They don't come from the region. They're Eastern Europeans. They're Jews from Europe. They just don't come from this region. I don't know when they converted or whatever, but the point is that they don't come from the region. And even if they did, like let's say you're a Zionist. Let's say you actually believe, yes, this is the land of the Jews. These people are not Jewish. They are not Jewish in the sense that you think they are. They have adopted a religion from the Middle East. That doesn't mean they are the original Hebrews or people that lived there 3,000 years ago.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Every single Israeli prime minister has a fake name. Did you know that?
Well, hardly. It was the first and I think the only instance in history when one people granted to a second people the land that belonged to a third people. And in the era of colonialism, we didn't even possess it as a colony at the time. It was a part of the Ottoman Empire. It was not ours to give away, but we gave it away to a group of European colonial Jews. They never made any secret of that. They met in Basel in the late 19th century, but they met many times in the United States, in Baltimore and many other places. The newspaper headlines are extant, in which they describe themselves as a Jewish colonial movement. And they were begging the British Empire to give them somewhere, anywhere, that they could found their Zionist settler state in. And they were in advanced talks with the British Empire about Uganda, about the Seychelles. They negotiated very seriously to have their state in Argentina, in Patagonia. That would have given rise to a different kind of PLO in the years to come. They were ready to found their settler state everywhere. They saw these white Europeans building settler colonial states in Australia, in Canada, in South Africa, Rhodesia, and so on. They wanted a piece of the action. It was only later that they invented ex post facto a religious justification for building their state in Palestine. As a matter of fact, all the leaders of the early Zionist movement were atheists. They didn't believe in God, but they believed that God gave them Palestine. It's a monstrous fabrication that a moment's study, 25 minutes of study will give you the whole antecedent of this thing. So they arrived in a country which already had people living in it. It was called Palestine. The people living in it were Palestinians. They were mainly Muslim, but a very substantial number were Christian. And there were even a considerable number of Jews who had always lived there. Even a considerable number of Jews who had always lived there, who had never been scattered across the world and then hunted by pogrom and witch hunt. The Jews in Palestine lived in amity with the Christians and Muslims there. Suddenly, millions of European Jews that neither the United States nor Europe wanted to take. These were people straight out of the Holocaust. But the doors of the United States and Great Britain and France were slammed shut in their faces, and they were told to go to Palestine. And they took other people's land, other people's houses, other people's farms, orchards.
These people came on ships holding up signs about World War II saying, please, we're refugees, let us into your home. And the Palestinians opened their doors to them. This is the story of Muhammad Hadid and Bella Hadid. Yeah, the model, Gigi Hadid. He was an infant. His mother had just given birth. They allowed these refugees, these Polish refugees, to live in their homes as refugees because they wanted to help them following a world war. And then one day they came back to their houses and the doors were locked. They came home, the doors were locked and guns were being held and they were told, leave right now or some soldiers are going to come murder you.
And the people who owned these properties and lived there for millennia were turned into refugees over a very short period of time. In the end, almost 1 million of them were driven out of the country altogether, and the remainder became second, third-class citizens in their own country, living in refugee camps. So in a place like Jenin, for example, you'll have heard of it, Jenin, Jenin, there's a big refugee camp there. And from that refugee camp, the inmates of what is effectively a concentration camp can see their own houses being lived in by Jewish people who came from New York, who came from Moscow or London or Paris. They can see people who've just arrived as immigrants picking their oranges off their trees in the gardens of their homes, whilst they live now 3 generations, 4 generations in squalor, regularly visited by extreme violence from settlers and from the Israeli state themselves.
What are the goals of the Zionists? What are their true intentions? This official letter signed by President Harry Truman actually answers this question. This letter proves that the true agenda of the Zionists was to create a Jewish state, a European presence in Northeast Africa, which is now called the Middle East, and not the restoration of ancient Israel. The letter reads, this government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and recognition has been requested by the provisional government thereof. Now keep in mind, provisional means arranged or existing for the present, possibly to be changed later. This means the Zionists were officially given a blank check to carry out their agenda worldwide without any pushback from other nations. Now let me start over. This government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and recognition has been requested by the provisional government thereof. The United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the state of Israel. Now, why did the late President Truman strike through Jewish state and wrote above it, State of Israel? Had he not done that, the current land of Israel would actually be called Jewish state. If you can fully grasp Zionism's true intentions, you'd also understand the agenda behind the words Jew and Jewish. You'd fully understand why they make clear distinctions between ancient Israelites versus Jew or Jewish.
You know what you are? You're an ancient Israelite.
Ancient Israel, that's who we are. That's who we are. So if you give me time, if you give me time,
but
all that he said,
I know. We don't have
so many years.
I know. Look at this. This is pages and pages of notes. And I promise we'll give more teaching. But here is my challenge to you.
All right.
I'm hearing some of your traditions. It's like the days of the Bible.
Yes.
Do you want to remain ancient Israelites, or you want to be Jews?
The Israeli government denied bombing the hospitals in Gaza, and now they are purposely bombing refugee camps. This is the same people whose ancestors were led to the death trains during the Holocaust with the supposed goal of keeping them out of harm's way, but actually led them to the concentration camps. Now, the same people instructed the Palestinians to flee south for safety only to bomb that area. Should we be surprised at their actions? Did you know that the land of Israel was not the initial place the Zionists targeted? In fact, at the 6th Zionist Congress at Basel on August 26, 1903, Herzl proposed the British Uganda program, initially targeting Uganda, followed by Canada and Australia. They also targeted Iraq, Libya, and Angola. Believe it or not, they even targeted Texas. What are their long-term goals? Should the Negroes living in the United States have any concerns? Absolutely. I believe the situation in Palestine can quite possibly be a dress rehearsal for things to come. Remember, during Red Summer or Blood Summer of 1919, the United States declared war on the Negroes, which over 36 of our communities were bombed using military forces and other military artillery.
It is the reason I've spent 50 years in this cause is not because I set out to do so, but because I went there 50 years ago, and what I saw there affected me so much, I consider it would be a moral betrayal not to speak out about it, not to tell other people about it, so that we might find at least some modicum of justice. This is the very day, Jimmy, in which the Camp David Accords were signed in Washington between Sadat, the Egyptian president, Begin, a former terrorist, Prime Minister of Israel, under the auspices of Jimmy Carter, signed on the lawn of your White House. And that Camp David Accord was supposed to lead to peace and amity and a modicum of justice for the Palestinian people, and an end to Israeli occupation of other people's territories. And of course, none of that has happened. everything has gotten worse. I've been in this 50 years. This is the worst moment I have experienced. 300 kids in 51 minutes. I mean, that breaks all records.
One thing, and this is a big thing, by the way, so I'm really hoping that a lot of people who are Jewish are watching this as well. That struck me as really odd when I was learning about Sabbatianism. And this really shocked me in my core because I've always told you guys I grew up with a large Jewish community. All my best friends were Jewish growing up. And I've always seen like the Star of David. That is a lot of Jewish people wear as a necklace, you know, and I thought that that was associated traditionally somehow with Judaism. And so I was very surprised, and I will ask the question, do you know the history of the Star of David? Why is it being called the Star of David? And I'm just going to just show you guys this straight up on Wikipedia. So if it's on Wikipedia, basically after they've obscured everything, that just must mean that it's just such an irreversible fact, because you wouldn't even want to admit this. But this is what the entry shows you about the Star of David, because it's actually a very recent thing that has been adopted from the Jewish community. Okay, it's not something stemming from the ancient times. And this is exactly what it reads. It reads that it is a derivative of the seal of Solomon, was used for decorative and mystical purposes by Muslims and Kabbalistic Jews. I want you to remember that, okay? So it's a derivative of the seal of Solomon. King Solomon was used for decorative and mystical purposes by Muslims and Kabbalistic Jews. It also goes on to say that only around 1 millennium later did the star begin to be used as a symbol to identify Jewish communities, a tradition that seems to have started in Prague before the 17th century. I want you to remember that as well. And from there spread to much of Eastern Europe in the 19th century. It came to be adopted by European Jews as a symbol to represent Jewish religion or identity in the same manner the Christian cross identified the religion's believers. The symbol became representative of the worldwide Zionist community after it was chosen as the central symbol on a flag at the first Zionist Congress in 1897. So this is a recent symbol. But I'm going to show you that there is a mention of that star. It is called something else in the Bible. It is referred to, and I'm going to just dig this up for you, something that is known as the Star of Remphan in the Bible, okay? And I'm going to show you that star right now. Here's a picture of it. Oh, you can see if you're Jewish, you're going, oh, that's the Star of David. You can see on that left side there, by the way, that you see a goat, and you see it looks like a pharaoh up top there. So you're going, okay, I don't associate this with Judaism whatsoever. And in the Bible, here's where it's mentioned. It says, "Ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon." It's also referenced later. It says, "Ye have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch and your Chian, your images, the star of your god, which ye made to yourself." So what is this referring to? It's referring to the ancient Canaanites.
Diana says, we have a friend who seems to want to delve more and more deeply into conspiracy theories. He told us that the Star of David is actually a satanic symbol widely used in pagan and occult areas. The only thing I can find on the internet about it is that it was introduced by Mr. Rothschild in the 40s, and that he was not a believer but had ties to the occult. Can you please tell us the truth behind this symbol? And we are Messianic believers, and we would like to be able to confront these anti-Semitic theories with truth. Thank you for your response. All right, well, let me just tell you, Diana, I've heard this stuff before over the years. I heard you are absolutely right. It's born out of anti-Semitic thinking. People who want to be opposed to Israel will find anything they can to complain about Israel, anything that is accepted as being the things of Israel, whether it being a kippah or a talit or a Star of David or some other symbology that is associated with Israel. They always want to tie it back to the cult. Here's the reason why. Well, we know we don't want to have anything to do with the devil, right? We don't want to have anything to do with the symbols of the devil. And if all of a sudden all of these things that are symbols of Israel are symbols of the devil, well, then guess what the logic is? So you stay away from Israel and anything to do with Israel. I want to remind you of something. Israel is the name of the kingdom. That's the name of the kingdom. So do you think there's a possibility that the devil, who hates the kingdom of God, could possibly conjure up some lies to deceive people, to get you to follow a lie and get you to go away from the things of the Lord? Yeah, I think that's been his dominant tactic throughout the entire history of mankind. So here's what I say when somebody comes up to me and wants to talk to me about, well, you know, the Star of David, you know, it's a satanic symbol. Get out of my face. Get behind me, Satan. I'm not listening to your lies.
Revolutionary salute to our DJ Chopwell for the donation to the war chairs. Revolution's real life. Absolutely appreciate you helping me keep the lights on in the House of Revolution. He say, roll up that good dinner, man. I absolutely will. I'm finna do that right now. Salute to you, family.
You go sell that lie stuff down in the ditch. You get down there with the rest of your anti-Semitic idiots. We're serving the Lord here. And we're going to pursue the light, not the darkness. And we don't waste our energy on stupid arguments going around to defame other people. Believe me, there's enough demons in this world and there's enough evil in this world. We don't have to go searching for it out of God's people. Let's encourage God's people and strengthen God's people and edify people and seek that which is pure and kind instead of trying to find complaint with something that we see as a common thing associated with Israel or with God's people. What a bunch of wasted time. So I really don't waste any of my time on those people. And what I would say is I'm not interested in discussing any of this with you, and you need to stop wasting your time on this.
The Canaanites were a brutal and a wicked culture. They frequently engaged in behavior that was considered obviously immoral and decadent, right? A list of the sins that Israel was told to avoid at all costs. Those sins included the Canaanites partook in incest, in child sacrifice, in homosexuality, and in bestiality. Now in your mind, you're going, okay, that sounds familiar. We spoke about this as well when I was telling you guys about the Khazarian kingdom. And I think somebody asked a question yesterday, like, oh, do you know about the Khazars? And I had mentioned to you that, yes, I'm very aware, by the way, because I think that is what was mentioned also in that documentary that Kyrie Irving shared, was that for a period of time, a lot of Israeli historians were writing books and receiving awards for having traced their lineage to the Khazars. A very similar story with that kingdom before it was crushed by Russia and Persia.
What we're going to do right here is go back, way back into time.
This person writes about a Cody's conspiracy, just gives a thumb up. Thank you. This person says, I'm glad that you brought up the Frankists. You should look into the Khazars and the origin of the Ashkenazis. BTW, did you know the origin of the word Cabal comes from Kabbalah? Yes, I did. I figured that, by the way, as I was digging into this. And yes, there is a Israeli historian named Abraham Pollock. And there's actually a lot of historians prior to World War II who received awards for saying that the origins of, which is why it was stunning to me to see Kyrie Irving treated in the way that he was treated, 6 steps to get back to your life, because he shared a documentary which was theorizing that the original Jews, I actually didn't watch the end of the documentary, but the point was he was making that documentary suggested that the people that are inhabiting Israel today are not the biblical Jews. That was the point of why he got into trouble. I cannot tell you one way or another. I have not gone into any anthropological research. What I can tell you is that prior to World War II, and you again can pivot to your browser right now and look up a man named Abraham Pollock. Okay, prior to World War II, he extensively wrote about, and the Israeli historians extensively wrote about the fact that they were the Khazars. They were like, yeah, here's the evidence, blah, blah, blah. He received awards from Tel Aviv University. And then suddenly after World War II, they said to him, like, this research was not helpful. And they just stopped printing his books. So I don't know. I literally can't tell you. And now if you ask someone about that, they'll say, oh, well, the science changed. Yes, we know the science always changes. The research always changes. Very convenient, but that's what that person is referring to. I'm just letting you know when he says the Khazars. Now, in case you're not familiar at all with who the Khazars are, outside of whether or not you can draw a line from the Khazar Empire, the Khazarian Empire, my understanding, and I have not done enough research into it, essentially it was an empire. And can you fact check that again this would be in Ukraine and what would be modern Ukraine, and let me know in my ear when you dig that up, Mark?
We're checking.
Thank you.
You can convert to Judaism. You can't convert to a blood family. You cannot convert to a race. Judaism is a religion. That's all it is.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the
What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside. You know, I want to share a video with you all because there are those Jews who are coming out stating that they have taken a DNA test. Now, for many of you all that don't know, it is illegal, from what they say, to take DNA tests in Israel. Now, I'm not going to get into the so-called laws of why it isn't, but I find that there are many now people who live in other countries outside of Israel who are doing DNA tests just to see how much of them being either Ashkenazi or Sephardic or just right out just European. And these two videos I want to share with you all is out of their own mouths, showing there is no connection to the land. There is no connection to a people. There is no to a people who the Bible speaks of. Check out this video and please watch after this video because it's important what this Bible says.
I'm about to show you something extremely controversial. It's even illegal in the state of Israel to obtain this. And if you do obtain it, it's illegal to show it and or talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, my DNA. Now, I bet you thought it was going to be a lot crazier than that, right? Now, you might ask yourself, why is it illegal to obtain this in the state of Israel? Because it proves through your DNA that Jews around the world have no ancestral ties to the land of Israel. Because it proves through your DNA that Jews around the world have no ancestral ties to the land of Israel.
We Jews have been in the land of Israel since the times of biblical Joshua.
Who is we? No, really, who is we? You live in Israel, so I don't expect you to be able to provide genetic or ancestral receipts for your claims about us Jews, because those kinds of receipts are illegal in Israel without a court order and other special permissions. The Jerusalem Post explains such a thing cannot exist as kits sold directly to the public, going on to say that they have possible effects on subjects and their families. Furthermore, the national implications of these tests could hold or affect, nice grammar, Jerusalem Post, could hold or affect with Israel being a government-recognized Jewish state. Don't you just love when they say the quiet parts out loud? But since they won't let you get receipts for us Jews, I brought my own. Wow. So I, an Ashkenazi, have no genetic or ancestral ties to the region of historic Palestine. I, an Ashkenazi, have no genetic or ancestral ties to the region of historic Palestine. And yet Israel still claims it's my homeland, which I could move to and become a citizen of under the ironically named Law of Return.
Have you heard of the Khazarim?
Yeah, that's us. That's me, actually.
Okay, so what is your, this is a question that comes from outside of Israel. What is your opinion about the theory that Ashkenazim came from Khazari?
It seems relevant. It's quite obvious that white Jewish people, Ashkenazim from Europe, are not genetically, as much as I can tell, I'm not an expert, but they don't look the same like Arab Jews, people that came from Arab countries, and Ethiopians. I don't think there's a lot of, there may be some genetic relations, but there's a lot of genetic differences. And any theory that says that we're not genetically come from the same ancestors makes sense to me.
What do you think? Now, if we go into the Bible, come on, turn your Bibles to Genesis 10. It will tell you who the Ashkenazis are. It states in the Bible in Genesis 10 in the second verse that Japheth had children. He had sons. His first son was Gomer, and then Gomer had a son named Ashkenaz. Now this Ashkenaz is what we will see or was called Ashkenazi. But his whole lineage of sons, if you read to the end, it said that they are of the isles of the Gentiles. That's right. Didn't say Jews, didn't say Hebrews, didn't say Israelites. It said the isles of the Gentiles. Because we know that the descendants of the Israelites are from Shem. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all come from Shem. But what many don't tell you is that when you look at the people who say they're Jews, some say they're Russian, German, some say they might be from Poland. They're from all of these different European countries. But what I love about this thing is that there are many right now who are doing DNA tests outside of Israel and proclaiming the fact that there is no connection. No, I'm not saying that. They are saying this. So I find it that, you know, when you allow people to freely research for themselves and measure themselves according to what Scripture says, according to what other people are saying, you're finding more and more of them are coming out. Now, this video right here I want to show is that this guy who is sharing a little bit about Ashkenazi Jews. Check the video out, and I'll be back.
Ashkenaz is one of the Gentile nations. Now, 80 to 85% of today's so-called Jewry, those who claim to be Jews in the world today, 80 to 85% of them are what is known as Ashkenazi Jews. And an Ashkenazi Jew is so named because he primarily descends from this guy in the Bible named Ashkenaz, which is clearly listed as one of the Gentile nations. Now, the reason for this is that there was a nation of people who were Europeans, white people, known as the Khazars. And in the 8th century after Christ, the whole nation of the Khazars turned unto Judaism. They converted to the religion of Judaism. Of course, it was a false, Christ-rejecting religion. And for a few hundred years, the empire of the Khazars was a power in Eastern Europe, and they followed the religion of Judaism. But eventually they were defeated by the Russians, and they were scattered into Eastern Europe. And so a lot of the Eastern European Jews today are the descendants of the Khazars.
And so a lot of the Eastern European Jews today are the descendants of the Khazars.
So what do you think? You know, plain and simple, there are those who've done research, and even their own scholars are starting to really wake up and realize that this whole thing of Ashkenazi has its own place because of this war between Palestine and Israel. Everybody's researching. Now, what does that have to do with us? I'm glad you asked. You see, because there are those out here who are saying that we are part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And when you begin to look into the lineage of who Shem is, all the way down, even to the curses that God had mentioned, these people, when you look at Deuteronomy 28, we fit the bill. When you read in whether Isaiah, Ezekiel, whether you read in Leviticus, you're going to find that there are these, I call them point signs, that paint a picture. Let me give you an example. I was talking to a guy today. He was a young minister, and he doesn't believe, or he says he don't know what color Adam is. I said, well, let's just let the story tell you who he was. He had to name the animals. What are all the animals? The five big: rhinoceros, lion, elephant, you got the hippo, you got the giraffe, you got the top five, and all the other safari animals that exist in Africa. You can't find them anywhere in Europe. And we know they would not be able to survive just out in cold weather and the cold and snow and all that there. They would die. So we do know that the Garden of Eden had to be in Africa, because this is where you find the animals. Now, I said, what color was Adam? Adam, yeah. Well, the Bible doesn't say. Well, okay. Did everything God make was perfect? He said, yes. Was the heavens perfect? Yeah, the moon, the stars, the earth, the animals. He said everything was perfect. Was man made in the image of God? Was that good at that time? Yes. Do you think God will create a sun to burn his own people? He stopped and paused. Because the Europeans get burned. They got to run from the sun. Because he mentioned when he walked up to me, when I asked him about the color of Adam, he said, the Bible doesn't mention. And I said, he was black. He said, well, we got melanin, but the white people don't have melanin. Yeah. Let's just stay with the story. Melanin, he said, was made to protect the skin. From what? The sun. If God created everything to be perfect, why would he create a sun that a people would have to run away from, dodge? See, back then, they didn't have sunscreen lotion. Why would God create such a thing? So we can allow scriptures to be able to tell us exactly who, what, when, where, and how, and why, if we're open up to it. So let those tell you their story as they get DNA tests and they do the research, and the truth shall come out. This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside.
Entire Zionist history, culture, Jewish identity is all contrived. It's synthetic, it's artificial. People sat down, and they still do today. There are think tanks, JPPI and various others like that. And they think, how could we further advance Zionism? How could we change the story? How could we better the story? How could we progress? How could we get more followers? And one of the things they did was they wanted to make Jews appear as if they are organically connected to the Holy Land, but not from a religious perspective, not from a spiritual perspective, not from a God-centric perspective, rather from a national perspective.
What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside. Yeah, I'm here in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, but I want to bring you all this video because here it is as a rabbi, Jewish rabbi, who is exposing the whole intentions of the Zionists, Netanyahu, who they have stolen the identity of what a Jew is, that they have also created this state of Israel by taking people's land, as well as stealing identities from those who are Jews, and yet we see the lie that has been presented to the world by the Zionists. Enjoy the video and add this to your library.
Today's guest is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, an international speaker, author, and rabbi for over 30 years. He's a well-known critic of Zionism, and his most recent work, The Empty Wagon, Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft, is a 1,381-page treatise on the differences between Judaism and Zionism.
Zionism itself was created as a substitute for Judaism, a replacement for Judaism, and a way to negate Judaism.
Yeah, so that takes us to our first question. What is a Jew?
Zionists are unable to answer because they negated the real definition. When I say the real definition, I mean the only intellectually consistent one. Being a Jew, in the most accurate way to describe it, is a job description given by God. God said, you are deputized into this religion, you are obligated to fulfill these commandments, whether you do them or not. The obligation, the job description, defines you as a Jew. Now, the Zionists didn't want this definition of Jew. The Zionist plan was to change, to end anti-Semitism by changing Semitism as far as Jews are concerned, by eliminating that. The problem with the original plan, assimilation, is that it didn't work. In the late 1800s, there were pogroms, primarily in Russia, which showed the Zionists, or the assimilated Jews actually, that assimilated Jews are still Jews and they're still hated. But now that's where the identity crisis comes in. The subtitle of my book is Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft. The Zionists didn't understand this. They were thinking, why do people hate us if we're just like the Gentiles? We're just regular Russians. Why do they look at us as Jews? That's a very good question. I once asked an anti-Semite, a real famous, I don't want to say his name, real famous anti-Semite, how do you decide who's a Jew? He says, well, whoever identifies as a Jew is Jewish. The Zionists had said to themselves, hey, we don't want to be Jews, but the Gentiles won't let us be Gentiles. So what are we? That was the identity crisis. And many scholars have used that phrase in various contexts. It was an identity crisis. So they came up with what I call identity theft. We're going to change the definition of Jew. Nationalism was just starting in those days. This was the 1800s. It was the Balkan people and others. Nation states started being formed in those days. And they said, hey, nationalism worked for so many people, let it work for the Jews as well. So we're going to change the definition of Jew to a nationality. Until the Zionists, nobody looked at the Jews as a nationality. The plan was to change the definition of a Jew to a nationality. And the idea was that once the Jews change their definition, the way they look at themselves, the world will change the way they look at the Jews as well. The Jews will also, by changing the way they look at themselves, change their personalities, change their ideology, change the way they act, the way they behave, and change their aspirations and their values. Whereas previously, Jews were, as the Bible describes it, Mamleches Kaihanim V'Goy Kadosh, which means a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion. And the Jews themselves, about 1,000 years ago, were the ones that suggested they live in ghettos. They wanted to be separate, socially and culturally separate from the rest of society, loyal to the countries that they live, absolutely, but culturally and socially separate, because we have our own laws, we have our own lifestyle, and they were. There were assimilated Jews that didn't like that, and when they had a chance to break out of the ghetto, they did, thinking, as I mentioned, that assimilation is going to end anti-Semitism and they're going to be like everybody else. When they saw that didn't work, then they tried nationalism. Nationalism is another name for Zionism, Jewish nationalism. That's all Zionism is. But the thing to know about Zionism is that whereas the Kurds, for example, look at themselves as a nationality and they're trying to find a state, right? The Jews never did. The Zionists had to convince the Jews that you are not what you think you are. You are not the Mamleches Kaihanim V'Goy Kodesh. You are not a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion, these religious laws. You are a nation. You need a language. You need a flag. You need a country. Because Jews didn't share a language for 2,000 years. More than for thousands of years, we hadn't spoken Hebrew. In biblical times they did, but that wasn't the national language of the Jewish people, meaning that's not what united us into being a people. The only thing that united us into being a people is our Torah, our faith. It was so well known that this quote that we are only a people because of our faith, it's over 1,000 years old, and it was like the meme of Jewish identity. Even Theodore Herzl mentions it in his diary. Everybody knew that. The Zionists had to change that. And because Jews had no flag, they had no common language, culture, or land, the Zionists had to provide them with it. The Zionists set out to synthesize a new nationality. But instead of creating a new nationality out of nothing, we'll stand and we'll call
like
ourselves
the Canism that you refer to.
The Canaanim, yes. So, yes, very good. There was this small group of kind of like Zionists called the Canaanim that decided to create a new nation. The Canaan is named after the people who were occupying, who were living in the Holy Land before Joshua came in there and conquered it. And they decided, okay, we're gonna make a new nationality. We're the Canaanim. It never hit it off, because why would anybody identify with that? So the Zionists, Theodore Herzl mostly had this brilliant idea. You know, if you want to if you want to change your identity, a witness protection program or something, you can get the government to give you a whole new identity, and that'll work. But there's a lot of resources and time and effort spent to create such. There's another way to do it that's easier. Kill somebody that's around your age, steal his papers, steal his birth certificate, steal his license, steal his identity, and you're him. That's what the Zionists did to the Jews collectively. We're going to erase Jewish identity. We're going to take their history, change it a bit. We're going to take their identity. We're going to take their self-image. We're going to take Jewishness, and we're going to make it into Zionism. We're going to get the Jews a flag. There was a Zionist flag before there was a state of Israel. We're going to get the Jews a language. There was a Zionist language. Modern Hebrew was created by the Zionists before there was a state of Israel, because they wanted to supply the Jews with national characteristics, national symptoms, national equipment. They redid history, redid ideology, and just started creating cultural centers and schools and an entirely new, it was a social engineering project. But one thing they were unable to steal, and that's the definition of a Jew. Considering what the definition of a Jew is, it depends on Torah law. Whoever the Torah says is obligated in the commandments is a Jew. So now, how are the Zionists going to define a Jew? Judaism, what value is the Holy Land? The Holy Land is the Holy Land. That's what it is to us, a holy land. It's not a national homeland. It's a wonderful place, and the borders of the Holy Land are not exactly the borders of Israel. The southern town Eilat is not part of our Holy Land, and southern Lebanon, somewhere south of Beirut, is the Holy Land. They couldn't even decide whether they wanted the Holy Land or somewhere else. You know, they had the Uganda plan, they had other things. And Theodore Herzl, who was the masterminds behind Zionism, he said, no, listen, guys, we want the Holy Lands because, remember, this is like identity theft. He didn't use these words. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said, for marketing purposes, we need to get the Jews to identify with our movement. So we're going to use Jewish symbols, phrases that are familiar, concepts that are precious, and we're just going to twist them a bit. The problem is you cannot have a Jewish country, Jewish state, the way they define a Jewish state, and also be a democracy. And if they want to retain it as a Jewish state, that's the cause of the problem. So the problem is that Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Israel is the only country in the world that claims that it is not the country of its citizens, it's the country of the Jews. This is the point that causes the problem. There is no country in the world that claims that it's the country of people who are not its citizens, never were its citizens, don't claim to be its citizens, don't plan on being its citizens. That means two things. Thing number one, if you live in Israel and you're not Jewish, although you may have civil rights to vote and things like that, Israel is not your country, meaning you do not have national self-determination rights in Israel. However, if you're somebody like me who lives outside of Israel, is not Israeli, I don't have a right to vote. I have no civil rights in Israel. Israel is my country. Netanyahu claims he's my prime minister. Israel claims to be my state. Israel is the only country like this. Nowhere else. Jews should identify as Israelis, but Israel is the only such country, and that's the cause of the problem. You see, it's all this identity theft. It's a new thing, about 20 years old maybe, identity Zionism. Google it.
I'd like to know what your position is on what the scripture actually says a Jewish person's connection or relationship has to be with that land.
According to Judaism, the land is holy. It was the same Jerusalem and the same Holy Land when the Romans had it, when the Mamluks had it, when the British had it. The only thing that will affect its holiness is the behavior of people in the land. If people behave in a godlike manner, the land itself becomes holier. If people behave against God, then the land itself becomes less holy. It's a spiritually sensitive land. And Jews were there when we had King David, when we had prophets, when we had a much higher level of fulfillment of Judaism than we do today. And then came the idol worshippers, and God said, as it says in the Bible, if you worship idols, God is going to kick you out of the land. And in fact, Jews say that passage 3 times a day in our prayers. And God did that. And we went back once and we got kicked out again. It was because of our sins. Yes, the Romans were the rod of God's wrath at the 2,000 years ago, but this is our belief. My argument isn't with somebody that says, okay, we don't believe that. So, but my answer to you don't believe that, then why do you need the holy? What is the Holy Land anyway? Then what's a Jew? King David, again, in the Bible, Ruth was a Moabite. She converted. Her descendant is King David. We have there's no problem with converts. Convert if you want. It's not a race. It's not a ethnicity. It's a relationship with God. It's a being deputized into God's work. That's all being Jewish is. And this is precisely why they insist on drafting all ultra-Orthodox Jews. And now you know why we refuse to go. They will refuse to serve their country. Oh, no. The purpose of Israel's army is not merely to be a military. The purpose of Israel's army is to be a melting pot. It's a church of Zionism. You know that they teach about Judaism and Jewish identity in the army? It's ridiculous. The army is their church of Zionism. In the Talmud, there are sections that discuss not technical legal Jewish law, but morals and religion and theology. It's called Agoda. In modern Hebrew, that word means a fairy tale. You see what they did? They did this. They changed the Hebrew accent to make it more Middle Eastern. This is it, you know? Zionism is anti-Semitic. Zionism is anti-Jewish. And the solution, we have to get rid of Zionism.
Think about it, 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 think about it.
Have you ever felt that the truth about who we are was stolen, buried beneath centuries of silence? What if I told you that a vault has been opened, not in Jerusalem, not in Rome, but in Iran, revealing ancient evidence that the true Israelites, the first chosen people of God, were black? Brothers and sisters, this isn't just another theory. This isn't a conspiracy. This is revelation, backed by ancient Persian records, buried texts, and cultural truths long erased by the Western pen. For centuries, we've been shown white prophets, alabaster apostles, and a sanitized Messiah. But the winds are shifting, and now, from the East, comes a voice that the West never thought would rise. A voice saying, "Black people, your story begins in the Word of God." Today, we journey together through fire, scripture, and suppressed history, asking one question: were the Black Israelites the first chosen people of Yahweh? If you're ready for chains to be broken, if you're ready to reclaim what was hidden, then stay with me to the very end. The truth demands it. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Isaiah 45 verse 1. Cyrus, king of Persia, was not just a conqueror. He was called by God, a Gentile anointed to free his people. But what if Cyrus wasn't simply liberating strangers? What if he recognized something deeper, a shared spiritual bloodline? That's exactly what Iranian scholars are now proclaiming. Ancient Persian archives, including the famed Cyrus Cylinder, describe the Israelites not as Middle Eastern exiles, but as Afro-Asiatic kin, black people, with dark skin, coiled hair, and customs that echoed across the rivers of Kush and the highlands of Ethiopia. Why would Persia, with no stake in Western racial politics, describe Israel like this? And more importantly, why did the West work so hard to paint a different picture? Let's face the truth, family. The Bible is drenched in Africa. Abraham journeyed through Egypt. Moses married Zipporah, a woman from Kush, a land known today as Sudan. And when Herod hunted the Christ child, the angel of the Lord didn't send him north to Rome. He sent him south to Africa. Iranian historians say these aren't coincidences. They are divine breadcrumbs, evidence that the Israelites were not merely neighbors to Africa, but children of it. According to Persian records, the Israelites shared linguistic roots with Cushitic and Egyptian languages, religious traditions rooted in African cosmology and symbolism, mythologies that mirror African oral histories of creation, flood, and redemption. This isn't just cultural overlap, it's a sacred alignment, a spiritual fusion. Persia didn't just record the past, they preserved it. And their descriptions of the Israelites stand in stark contrast to the pale European figures of Renaissance art. These weren't marble-skinned saints in silk robes. These were black men and women carrying the sound of drums, the fire of prophecy, and the rhythm of Africa in their bones. So now we must ask the question that echoes through the ages. If this is true, if the evidence is rising like morning light, then who rewrote our holy images? Who changed the faces in our sacred stories, and why? It's time to confront the theft, because the truth is not just knocking, it's breaking through the vault. Family, let's speak plainly. History wasn't just forgotten, it was rewritten. Iranian scholars call it what it is: intellectual colonization. A campaign not of swords and chains, but of pens and paintings. A rewriting of biblical history to reflect European faces, Western glory, and white divinity. When the Renaissance swept through Europe, it brought more than art. It brought the erasure of truth. Gone were the black saints of Ethiopia. Gone were the Torah keepers along the Nile. In their place, whitewashed images, a porcelain Mary, a blonde-haired Jesus, and apostles gleaming with pale halos. But we know better. And now so does the world. Iran is lifting the veil, not with opinion, but with evidence. Ancient artifacts unearthed in Iran and East Africa tell a different story, a story soaked in melanin and mystery. These relics reveal the tree of life, carved into both African temples and Hebrew sanctuaries, solar discs and serpents, symbols of divine wisdom, appearing in both African theology and Hebrew mysticism, rituals of sacrifice, song, and oral prophecy, not foreign to Israel, but shared with the sacred practices of the African motherland. Could it be that Moses' tabernacle, that portable holy place, was shaped by African design? Could the Psalms of David be echoing the ancestral wails and rhythms of African soul? Iranian linguists took the investigation further, and what they uncovered shakes even the foundations of language. They found that Hebrew, the tongue of the prophets, shares semantic DNA with languages from Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Words like Eliyahu, Moshe, Yeshua, they all have linguistic cousins in the dialects of Africa. And the Genesis stories, the tales of creation, of the flood, of the ark, these mirror ancient African oral traditions almost word for word. Coincidence or confirmation? And let's not forget this, children of promise. Noah's descendants spread across the earth, but the firstborn of that new world stepped onto African soil. This isn't just a correction of history. It's a reclamation, because the ones left out of the rewritten book were the ones who wrote it first. Why is Iran speaking now? Why, after centuries of silence, does Persia rise to speak truth that Western empires buried? Because this moment is about more than archaeology, more than theology. This is about power, land, and identity. By challenging the identity of the ancient Israelites, Iran is doing more than rewriting history. It's redefining legitimacy. If the original Israelites were black, as their evidence suggests, then how can a Eurocentric narrative continue to claim exclusive divine right to the Holy Land? This isn't just a scholarly debate. It's a challenge to Western religious monopoly, to political systems built on distorted ancestry, and to a Christianity that too often erased the very people it was born through. By resurrecting the Afro-Asiatic roots of Israel, Iran isn't simply looking backward. It's making a geopolitical move, placing itself not just as a critic of the West, but as a guardian of forgotten truth, a keeper of the vault, a steward of suppressed scripture. But family, don't get distracted by the politics, because there's a deeper call beneath the headlines. Iran's revelations are not only about them, they're about us. To the Black believers across America, across the Caribbean, across Africa, this is your wake-up call. If we are the people of the book, if our ancestors walked with prophets, sang songs by the rivers of Babylon, carved symbols into temple walls, and whispered prayers in Hebrew tongues, if we bore the covenant and carried the ark, then we are not lost. We are not a scattered afterthought. We are a silenced origin. And now the silence is breaking. The time has come for Black believers to stand, not as visitors to the word, but as heirs of it. The truth has traveled across centuries, through empires, beneath vaults, and now it stands in front of us, daring us to remember who we are. Not exiles, not outcasts, but chosen. What does it mean, family, to hear that God's chosen people may have looked like us? It means we are no longer staring into stained glass windows, searching for ourselves. We are finally looking into a divine mirror. It means our blackness is not a burden, not a blemish. It is covenant, marked by the same God who split seas, rained manna, and thundered from Sinai. It means our generational pain, our slavery, our songs of sorrow, they're not isolated tragedies. They are reflections of ancient captivity, echoing the cries of Israel under Pharaoh, Babylon, and Rome. But if the suffering mirrors theirs, then so does the deliverance. It means our hunger for scripture, our passion for praise, our instinct to weep, dance, and shout in worship. That's not coincidence. That's ancestral memory awakening, a holy DNA calling us home. We are not visitors in this biblical narrative. We are the narrative. And the world is finally catching up. For decades, the Black Israelite movement was pushed to the margins, dismissed as radical, branded as fringe. But now, with Persian scholarship, ancient texts, and linguistic proof rising like smoke from the altar, those cries of "We are the true Israelites" no longer sound like protest. They sound like prophecy. This truth is about to shake pulpits. Because once people realized that the figures in Scripture were not cloaked in European skin but wrapped in African sun, the church will be forced to reckon with its art, its sermons, its institutions. It will call churches to repaint sacred images that erased Black holiness, retell old sermons that denied Black identity, Retrain seminary minds that were taught to look west for wisdom instead of south for truth. And yes, many will resist. Some will call this heresy. Some will cry division. But that's always been the response when the oppressed start reading the book for themselves. When the slave picks up the scroll, when the descendant of the exile dares to remember, chains break, eyes open, truth rises, and nothing stays the same. So now I ask you, beloved family, what if the chosen people weren't cloaked in ivory skin and royal robes, but wrapped in brown skin, bearing scars of exile and strength of soul? What if the blood of ancient Israel still flows, not through palaces but through pews, plantations, and praise breaks? Through a people who were chained in ships yet never stopped singing hallelujah? What if you, yes you, are part of that sacred story? The vaults of Iran have opened, and what pours out is not just history, it is heritage. The cry of a people long silenced is rising, not for vengeance, but for recognition, restoration, revelation. We can no longer wait for Western approval to claim what heaven already wrote in our bones. It's time to reclaim the book, reclaim the bloodline, reclaim the blessing. Because this isn't just about correcting the past, it's about stepping into divine destiny. Thank you from the depths of my soul for walking this journey with me. If this message stirred something in your spirit, don't let it stay buried. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who needs to know who they really are. Because truth is rising, and you were born for such a time as this. Until next time, stay bold, stay blessed, and never forget, you are not forgotten. You are chosen. What if I told you the paintings in your childhood
Many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who were they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination.
I've come across a video of a white scholar talking about who is the real Jews, or white saying or confessing, saying white Israelites are not the real Jews. And it sparked some conversation within my head. And I said, let me talk to you. It's about the Jews, it's about who is the real Jews and everything. First of all, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for always coming back. Thank you for opening your minds. Thank you for standing on the truth. Thank you for supporting me. Today, as I said, I'm diving in a clip that is shaking people's spirit. This is about spirituality. When I talk about it, I feel the shaking in the comments and everything. But this white scholar was bold enough to say what many people are not or are avoiding to say about the white Israelites and the real Jews. Let's hear what he has to say, and then we're going to come back. I have some papers here, I have some history to share with you, and you have yours. Tell me in the comment section about this video. But first of all, let's listen to it.
I want to discuss a little bit of sensitive history. And if I go to sensitive history, well, then I must quote sources that say it rather than that I say it. This is a fascinating book, and the web pages are there. You can check it out. Facts are facts. This is a book that was written by a Jewish man. And he confronted the thinking of many of the high-placed individuals of the world. This is interesting stuff. In this book, Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man, writes about the Jews and reveals an interesting history. He states that the present Jews in Palestine are not the true descendants of the Judeans, but rather descendants of the Khazars. In the letter addressed to D. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, a convert to Catholicism, the author, Benjamin Friedman of New York City, dated October 1954, provides some fascinating insights. This is in the public domain. Let's study this for a while and see where we get. Benjamin H. Friedman claims that the word Jew was only introduced into the English language in the 18th century, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodeorum, which means Jesus of Nazareth, ruler of the Judeans. Now this is fascinating. I went and checked it, and it is so. Yes, it happens to be so. Now the word Jew today has a religious as well as a political connotation. You think of a Jewish entity, a government, but you also think of their religion incorporated at the same time, whereas the term Judean is a geographic connotation. It's a geographic. It doesn't incorporate the religion. It's where he came from. He was from Judah. He was a Judean. He further writes, the form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all rolled into one, of those who practiced Pharisaism. The Talmud today occupies the same relative position with respect to those who profess Judaism. So the rituals and rites that many of them observed were based on the Talmud and not on the Torah. Rabbi Morris, this is all from the source. Rabbi Morris in Khazar wrote a most revealing and comprehensive article with the title, What is a Jew?, which was published as a feature article in Look magazine in June 17, 1952 issue. In that article, Rabbi Morris Khazar evaluated the significance of the Talmud to Judaism today. In that illuminating treatise and that important subject, by the most qualified authority at the time, Rabbi Morris N. Khazar stated, the Talmud consists of 63 books of legal, ethical, and historical writings of the ancient rabbis. It was edited 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus. It is a compendium of law and lore. It is the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, and it is, note, the textbook used in the training of rabbis. So rabbis are trained according to the Talmud, and the Talmud has very little in common with the Bible. Then he states, from the birth of Jesus until this day, there have never been recorded more vicious and vile, libelous blasphemies of Jesus or Christians and the Christian faith by anyone, anywhere, or any time than you will find between the covers of the infamous 63 books, which are the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law as well as the textbook used in the training of rabbis. I don't want to go into it. If I were to put the quotes on the screen, which the Talmud contains about Jesus, you would be horrified. It is some of the vilest statements that I have ever had the dishonor of reading. And this is what their training consists of. He then proceeds to quote some of the most horrendous statements from the Talmud regarding ethical issues, and not only regarding ethical issues, which deal with many, many issues from economics to relations with women, etc., and, of course, the view on Christ. As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many, many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who were they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history throughout the world, the origin and the history of Khazars and the Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it. This was the Khazar kingdom. Here is the Black Sea, the Byzantine Empire. Here was Persia. And here was the kingdom of the Khazars. It was a massive kingdom. Now let's look at some of this interesting history. The Khazars were an Asiatic nation. And the Jewish Encyclopedia states Persian origin that converted to Talmudic Judaism. Now, obviously, some of the rabbis involved there could have been Judeans and probably were Judean descendants, but their converts are not Judeans. And that had conquered a vast area of Eastern Europe, which was in turn later conquered by the Russians in the 10th and 13th century. So that is why there are so many Russian Jews. Have you ever thought where they came from? Did they escape from Palestine? Were they the lost 10 tribes? Did they emigrate to Russia? No. This is a totally different nation that accepted Talmudic Judaism. He writes, after a historic session with representatives of the three monotheistic religions, King Bulan, 7th century, decided against Christian and Islam, because Islam had just arisen, and selected as the future state religion the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and not known and practiced as Judaism, which was totally different, which was based on the Bible. They adopted the Hebrew alphabet, and the Khazars adapted words to their requirements from the German, the Slavonic, and the Baltic languages. This language was known as Yiddish. And Yiddish used the Hebrew alphabetic characters, but not Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I've always wondered, when I hear them speaking Yiddish, I understand quite a few words. Why? Because I'm German. They had many exchanges with universities and their students were trained. So here is another nation which had occupied this area And they had adopted this religion and brought rabbis in and trained the people, but they were not Judean. Now let's jump to today. In accordance to this history, the religion of the modern state of Israel is based on Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions and is far removed from the biblical worship of Yahweh. And if it is based on the Talmud, it is so anti-Jesus Christ that it belies understanding. And here we have, in March 2006, while visiting Yeshiva University at Brooklyn, New York, a Jewish institute dedicated to the study of the what? Talmud. We have Cardinal Kasper. Who's Cardinal Kasper? Cardinal Kasper is the cardinal associated with ecumenism. They are honoring the Talmud together. You see, behind the scenes, there is a pact. Because I, as a Christian, can sympathize with every other religion, but I cannot embrace a religion that speaks evil of Jesus Christ. Nor can I have a union with such a religion. Because can two walk together lest they be agreed? Now let's get back to the Napoleonic society and see what happened further. Napoleon established both the Bank of France, we saw that, the French Bourse, the stock exchange, as well as the National Department of Tax Boards. Do we have all of those systems of governments in the world today, yes or no? Yes, we do. And we have the same system of economics today, yes or no? Yes. The world is run by the stock exchange. To ensure equitable taxation for all, consequently, the income of the French peasants skyrocketed. Think tanks and research centers were established in France to work on projects vital for national economy. So a totally new economic order evolved. Who started these organizations? We will have to see. Who runs the secret societies today and the secret organizations? Who started them? Who is the instigator? Who's the boss behind the scenes? We will have to see. And maybe we'll get a different picture of what's happening in the world. An industrial board was organized to provide data and information to French industry, as exemplified by the success of the sugar beet farming and the canning industry. In the military, Napoleon pioneered in what we describe today as the principles of war. And did you know that these principles, the armies of today, are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his grand army, and it has been used ever since. Who controls these armies?
Welcome back. You have heard the video, and I'm shocked too, but it's something that I know because I've been reading books. I can't lie, and I know what he's trying to say is reality. I'm going to start with this video. The white scholar, he is calm, he's educated, well-researched, explain that the modern-day European Jews, mostly the Ashkenazi, are not the descendants of the original Hebrews of the Bible. He says history has been distorted. As we know, the erasure of history, that the Israelites in the Bible were people of color from regions of Northeast Africa and the Middle East, if I'm not wrong. So, he boldly states that these Jews of Europe are not the real. The real Israelites were black people. You get me? And that statement alone, coming from a white academic, is revolutionary. When you talk about history erasure, it's not all about what happens to Africa, Kemet, Aklebulan, Ethiopia. We are talking about the Bible, the real people of the Bible. Okay? For years, black people who claimed the Israelites' ancestry were mocked. They were ignored. They were silenced. But now I've been going across social media, and I see a lot of white people, white scholars, white historians, and researchers confirming what black people already knew. I know you know this. It's in our bones. It's in our blood. But why this is coming now? Why this confession happening now? Why is the truth being revealed in these seasons? It's because the world is waking up. Okay? The world is waking up. And those who suppress truth are losing control over the narrative. Okay? So let me take a step back. Let's go back to history. I love learning history. I love talking about history. I'm so good because I want to know who I am. I want to know my identity. I want to know the identity of my black people. So let me go back to history a little bit. The Israelites were people descendant from Jacob. Okay? Israelites were descendants of Jacob, also known as Israel. So whose story is told throughout the Old Testament? Israelites, they were enslaved in Egypt, freed under Moses, and later formed kingdoms. And mostly notable, the kingdom of Israel and Judah. Am I right? Let's continue. To be clear, Egypt is in Africa. That's what I think. Egypt, not think, it's reality, to be real. Egypt is in Africa, okay? The entire biblical setting from Genesis to Exodus takes places in North and East Africa. The Israelites married Egyptians. They lived among Canaanites, Cushites, Nubians, name them. And Moses passed as an Egyptian, which means he looked like an African. Solomon had children with the Queen of Sheba. Queen of Sheba or Queen of Sheba? Yeah. Solomon had children. Now, from modern day Ethiopia, Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. Jesus, was hid in Egypt. So I'll say this, that only is sinking in the minds. If these biblical figures were white, how could they hide in Black Africa? If these biblical figures were really white people, why were they hiding between black people, in the midst of the black people? So the truth is, the ancient Israelites were melanated people, okay? The ancient Israelites were melanated people, okay? And I'll say this, melanated people, that means they were dark-skinned. That means that Africa, there is an African in appearance. And that's not just opinion. That is geography. That is anthropology. That is archaeology. Yeah? They hid Jesus in Egypt within black people. How can you hide white person within black people? That means Jesus was black. Okay? So when the scholar says the Israelites were black, it's just confirming what our ancestors always knew. It's just confirming what many Africans tribe preserved in oral history, what the diaspora tell in their souls or feel in their souls. He's just confirming. It is nothing new. Okay? So, how did the real Israelites get replaced? The erasure of history. And here is where it gets deep. During the Roman what? During the Roman, conquest? Many Jews were exiled. They were enslaved or filed persecution. Okay? Large groups of Israelites fled into Africa. Here is where it gets deep. During the Roman conquest, many Jews were exiled. Some were enslaved or even fled persecution. And large groups of Israelites fled into Africa, and where they were absorbed into local population, and they continued their traditional language and practices. Some of these groups became the Igbo of Nigeria. Some of them became the Lembe of Zimbabwe, and some of them became the Beta Israel of Ethiopia, and others, they are in Mali, Ghana, and Congo too. But centuries later, during the Khazar Empire, a massive conversation happened in Eastern Europe. There's these people called Turkic. The Turkic people adopted Judaism for political reasons, and this became the Ashkenazi Jews, most of whom migrated to Europe. They were not Israelites by blood, but by conversion, or conversion, conversion, not conversation. When we look at who hold the title Jew or the identity Jew today, many are descendants of these European converts. This does not mean that every Ashkenazi Jew is fake, but it does mean that race and ancestry were erased and black identity was pushed out of the biblical narrative. The white scholar in the clip finally acknowledging this, and I love that because it's good when you talk about this. Now, I want to talk about something here. Colonizers and missionaries told black people that our ancestors were pagans. And they told us we had no history, that our greatness began with slavery or colonization. But they never told us that we were already part of the biblical story, that the people of God may have looked like us, that the original Israelites were our ancestors. And this lie allowed colonizers to strip off our dignity as black people. They rob us of purpose and claim spiritual superiority. They used their version of the Bible to enslave us while hiding the truth that we were the very people the Bible spoke about. When you erase people's connection to divinity, to prophecy, to chosenness, you disconnect them from power. And that happened to black people. But now the power is returning. The truth is, when the truth is coming back, then the power is coming back. And this scares those who build their identity out of lies, because a lot of people build their identity out of lies. A lot of empires was built out of lies. A lot of history was built out of lies, out of the back of the black people. And the truth always finds a way out. We are in the age of divine awakening. Young black people, as I say always, young black people are asking questions. Scholars from Africa and the diaspora are researching deeper than ever before. I've gone live with this one guy, and he has points. He is going deep and deeper, because a lot of black Americans diaspora right now, they are researching, and the lies are no longer working. Social media is spreading truth faster than censorship can even stop it. And most importantly, black people are no longer waiting for validation. We are reclaiming our history. We are reclaiming our spirituality and our place in the global narrative. And this confession is important not because we need white approval, but because it exposed the level of distortion the world has been living under. It confirms that we were never lost. We were just hidden for a time. Africa is not just a continent of resources. It's a continent of roots. And that's why they always say black people are the first people in the face of the earth. Africa is not just a continent. It's a place of spiritual and historical and biblical roots. The Nile Valley civilization, the Semitic tribes of the Horn, the Hebrews, speaking communities of West Africa, all point to one truth. Africa was never outside of the story. Africa is the story. And we see signs in Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, in Kenya and beyond, okay? We see signs of Asians, traditions that align with the Hebrews faith. So when white scholars say the real fearless or this fearless thing that Israelites were black, they are just pointing to us, okay? They are pointing to the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. They are pointing to the Africans scattered across the Americas. They are pointing to you. You as a black person, you as a black American. They are pointing to you, Kenyan, Ghanaian, and Nigerian, okay? So the confess from the white scholar is not just information. It is confirmation of the rise that is happening in our time right now, the rise of identity, the rise of knowledge, the rise of spiritual restoration. And we are not begging any longer to be accepted. We are standing on what we know. We are not chasing inclusion. We are building our own truth, our own power, our own future. And whenever the revelation comes out, it will shake the world, okay? And it's already doing that. And as more white voices begin to admit the truth, remember that black people knew it first. We knew it before. Because our ancestors, they carried this knowledge through blood, through pain, through science. But now we speak. So, my African brothers and sisters, we have a lot to learn. First of all, we need to reclaim our crown. Reclaim your crown. And my Black Americans family, you were never disconnected. You are just displaced, but not the rest. We are here together. So, to my entire African diaspora, it is time. The world is watching, the lies are crumbling, and the truth is marching forward. And you are in front, okay? Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for...
The discovery of the Gold Coast served indeed yet more to enlarge the sphere of the navigation of the Portuguese than their slave trade, but it forced them also to extend themselves on the coast and to settle colonies in Congo, Angola, and other places which they had till then neglected. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. King John II in 1492 expelled all Jews to the island of St. Thomas, Sao Tome, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Leongo, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended.
What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy. Go Black to Africa. So many of us out here are doing the hard work in providing for our people to understand who we truly are as a people, especially those who are in Central America, South America, and North America, that these writings that are being found in other countries by their writers, Italy, that you saw, I just did a video on, Spain, that we're going to find, as well as Portuguese, that their writers, their historians are depicting and showing we people, brothers and sisters who's been over in the Atlantic slave trade, we're the real Jews. Watch this video and I'll be back.
The Hibernian Magazine, or the Compendium of Entertaining Knowledge. When was this published? We're going to see. 1784. 1784, the New York Public Library. Right. The discovery of the Gold Coast served indeed yet more to enlarge the sphere of the navigation of the Portuguese than their slave trade, but it forced them also to extend themselves on the coast and to settle colonies in Congo, Angola, and other places which they had till then neglected. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. King John II in 1492 expelled all Jews to the island of St. Thomas, Sao Tome, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Leongo, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. By these colonists, St. Thomas soon became a considerable place of trade and valuable for its sugar plantations. Valuable for its sugar plantations. Isn't that what we just read? That these Jews that were dropped off here, these Portuguese, these people that were deported by the Portuguese, they had a thriving sugar production. It says the climate proved extremely unwholesome for Europeans. The other document said they were stripped naked and left with alligators and other beasts of prey. This one right here is the first time that I'm showing you that we see that they are black. It says that they are black Jews. Again, published in 1784. These are black Jews. Now, they will try to say we're reading this out of context and black might not mean black. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's look at another source. Yeah, I'd actually, like I said, this is my third time, I think, recording this. So, yeah, it was open a couple times. So now let's go to 1851, a treatise on physical geography comprising hydrology, geognosy, geology, meteorology, botany, zoology, and anthropology. But I'm showing you guys piece by piece. We know that there was a place called Judah on the west coast of Africa. We know that they called it that because one of the tribes were believed to be there. And now we see that they are called Portuguese. The Portuguese Jews were called black Jews. So now we'll come down to here. We need go no further. This is, hold on, let me give you this right here. Again, a treatise on physical geography, published 1851. See what other information we can find. And Northwestern University. This is where they got the original from. Northwestern University, 1851. So now, when these urban apologists keep telling you that they debunked all this stuff, make them show you the receipts. Make them show you a video or a peer review paper showing they debunked this document from Northwestern University. So right here, we need go no further than the Jews of southern Spain. Remember, the Jews from Spain went into Portugal, and compare them with those of Holland and northern Germany to perceive a very striking difference. The Spanish Jew is always dark complexion, and his hair is uniformly black, whilst the German Jew is often as fair as any German and has light or red hair with blue eyes. The various shades of color observable among the Negro or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy and hot, we find jet black complexions, and this is the very country from which American Negroes have been derived. Again, the various shades of color observable among the Negroes or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy, and hot, we find jet black complexions, and this is the very country from which the American Negroes have derived. They're talking about the western coast of Africa where they put those black Jews. Now, this is from Hannah Adams. Now, that was the picture I had up when we first started, and I said we'd come back to it. So let me pull up Hannah Adams again. Hannah Adams is this lady right here. This lady right here. So now we're going to talk about Hannah Adams because they claim that we're making this history up. So now we know the Portuguese Jews are black. We verified that in two sources. There's going to be more. There's going to be more to come. We know that the Portuguese Jews are connected to West Africa. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. So now she has her book. I'm going to read this in two parts. So her book, you read the regular page and it continues just like a regular book. But then in the notes section, when you read it, it continues over to the next page, almost like a tiny book within her book. So first I'm going to read the main part, and then I'm going to come back and read the notes. So right here, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Judah. So now all this stuff is connected. So the people on the west coast of Africa called Judah or a Judah or Wida or Wida are connected. They were believed to be Jews. We've seen that from a French source and a non-French source. I believe it was an English source. We see that. We see that they are black. We see that they were deported from Portugal because they fled from Spain. Now, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claim their descent from the tribe of Judah. Now we're getting down to specific tribes. We're getting down to a specific tribe here, and found these pretensions on a supposition which prevails among them that many of their ancestors removed or were sent into Spain at the time of the Babylonian captivity. In consequence of this supposed superiority, they till very lately would not by intermarriage or otherwise incorporate with their brethren of other nations. They had separate synagogues. And if a Portuguese Jew, even in England or Holland, married a German Jewess, He was immediately expelled from the synagogue, deprived of every civil and ecclesiastical right, and ejected from the body of the nation. A late instance has occurred of a Jew in Berlin, this is Germany, who, having married the daughter of a Portuguese physician, the parents of the girl went into mourning as for the death of a relation. The manner of the Portuguese Jews differ from the rest of the nation and are more polished. They have nothing peculiar in their dress. The opulent among them vie with the other nations of Europe in refinement, elegance, and show, and they differ from them in worship only. In Portugal, the name of a Jew is a term of such high reproach that the government found it necessary to enact a law which forbade any person to call another by that appellation. If a man who is styled a Jew to his face stabs the offender, the law does not condemn him, and trifling as this regulation may appear, it has produced beneficial effects. So now, the name Jew was outlawed to the point that if you called someone a Jew, they could stab you and not be held guilty. Yale is a university. This map is from 1774, Yale. So the first thing I'm going to show you, because her and Damon Richardson lied and said Judah wasn't on the west coast of Africa. It wasn't named after them. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a map from 1774. This is Africa, performed by the senior Danville under the patronage of the Duke of Orleans, revised and improved by Mr. Bolden and E. Bowen. Emmanuel Bowen is the one who made the map that we see the most. I believe it's the 1747 map. We see that the most because it's part of his famous collection in which it shows Judah on the west coast of Africa, the kingdom of Judah. And they say that that map has been debunked. But here Emmanuel Bowen works on another map that they claim that, remember, they will tell you that they've debunked a lot of the Israelite evidence. Yet they don't touch this map right here. 1774, another map Emmanuel Bowen worked on for the Duke of Orleans. We're going to look at this map bigger. Still, you see library.yale.edu. This map has been enlarged already because it's such a large file. It takes a few seconds to get bigger. So Negritia. Now, remember, she said we misinterpret this evidence. We make this evidence up, right? Now, I'm going to build a case. I'm going to slowly build this case up because I want you to see how thoroughly and how much information there is for her to sit there and lie and say this information outright does not exist. So right here, according to Idrisi, the land hereabout was peopled by Jews. According to Idrisi, the land hereabout was peopled by Jews. This is the west coast of Africa. You can see this right here. This is the area I'm looking in right here where the yellow box is. This is the area, Lamlim, right here. Now we come down here and read this square right here. It says all Negritia from the head of the Sanaga is very little known, but the situation of this great region as described by Ptolemy, joined with the knowledge of Idrisi, the Nubian geographer, and Leo the African, agrees with several new discoveries, all uniting to verify their accounts. I therefore conclude that the Niger flows from west to east and has an affinity with the Sanaga, or has no affinity with the Sanaga or any part thereof, but falls into the lakes that communicate with the river Nile. So now he's talking about the Niger River. The Niger River is going to come up again, and that's why I read that. So now this area right here is peopled by Jews. The Niger River is mentioned here. You see the kingdom of Dahomey, whose prince subdued the states of Ardra and Wida, W-I-D-A. Pay attention to the spelling, about the year 1724. You see Ardra here. You see Wida here on the slave coast. Ardra, Wida. Remember Wida, W-I-D-A. So now this map, all these links will be in the description to the maps and everything else. So now right here, this is a French website, gallica.bnf.fr. This is a French website. This is from 1890, May 1st, 1890. So we go down to here. Let me make sure. All right, text. Now I'm going to copy part of this text, right? Wida, Fida, we're going to grab this right here. Now, their whole point was, we're going to come back to this. I'm going to pull her up again. Their whole point was that Wida was not named after the tribe of Judah. So now what I'm going to do is a French to English translation. And I'm going to paste the text into here that I just copied. Now, according to Google Translate, you see me do this right here. Weta, Feta, Weta, Aweta, Judah, or a Judah is a city old, frequented since the 16th century by Portuguese slavers. This word is split up, but it's supposed to be Portuguese. Portuguese slavers who gave it its name. Its inhabitants were said to be Judoquays, and they were indeed considered to be a remnant of scattered tribes of Israel to the north. The Alala River, whose real name is Ephra, had become Euphrates for scholars. So now it says they were indeed considered to be a remnant of scattered tribes of Israel. So now we are establishing that this land called Weta or Weta contained people who were said to be one of the scattered tribes of Israel, right? This is in this French document right here on BNF or gallica.bnf.fr. This is from France. I'll give you guys the link. This is from Bulletin Society. I'm not going to try to pronounce all this. Geography. And again, this is from 1890. So now we still haven't tied it to us, though. We've just shown that, yes, there is a place in West Africa named after Judah. It is said that the Jew or tribe lived there. One of the tribes of Israel was there. So now let's see if we can find any consistency in this. So now the Jews of Spain and Portugal and the Inquisition. This is published in 1877 by Princeton Theological Seminary. So when you hear these urban apologists saying they debunk the Israelite sources, ask them to show you the video or documentation of them debunking this source from Princeton Theological Seminary. Ask them to show you the source or the video of them debunking the map from Yale. Ask them to show you these things because they keep making these claims. So anyway, the Jews of Spain and Portugal, we're on page 68 of 148. The link will be in the description for you to read yourself. You can see it's not a screenshot. This is the whole book. If I do this, the page will turn. All right. Thus was Spain deprived of her large Jewish population. The synagogues were purified and used as Christian churches. The vast sums of money which were owed to the Jews and the still larger amounts which they were forced to leave behind them found their way partly into the hands of their debtors or still more into those of the sovereign. The chief professors of medicine were sent out of the country to the terrible inconvenience of the population and trade and industry languished till they almost died out. Unfortunately, at the time of the expulsion, the plague was raging in Castile, and the fugitives brought with them the disease, propagating it wherever they went, and not unnaturally causing their advent to be viewed with loathing and horror. This circumstance induced King John to hasten their departure from Portugal, for which purpose ships were duly provided according to the agreement. But such was the temper of the captains and sailors that they subjected the Jews to the hardest possible conditions. They plundered them of their goods and valuables, even to their very clothes, and landed them naked and bare of everything on barren points of the African coast, leaving them to die of starvation or to be sold into slavery to the Moors. Nor was this all. The king wrested from their parents all children from between the ages of 3 and 10 of those Jewish immigrants who from poverty or otherwise had omitted to pay the capitation tax on entering, or who were forced to remain in Portugal, and had them transported to the newly discovered islands of St. Thomas, which is the same as Sao Tome, which then swarmed with alligators and other beasts of prey to be brought up as Christians. So he's telling you, the Jews were deported out of Portugal because they didn't pay the tax, and they had their children stripped away and sent to this island where there were alligators and other beasts of prey. This is another source from Princeton Theological Seminary, published 1882, The Earth and Its Inhabitants. Right here, page 320 of 628. The link will be in the description. East of Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to Europeans by the various names of Fida, Hasida, Wida, or Wida, W-I-D-A. I told you to remember that because of the map. W-I-D-A, same place. It's important to establish this so the urban apologists can't wiggle their way out of anything. Same place. So let me get back. The old writers called it Judah. So now we know why the 1747 Emmanuel Bowen map says Judah. Now we know why this one says Witta. It says, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name is Ephra, became the Euphrates. Didn't we just read that in the French source? That they were believed to be a tribe of Israel. So now we have two different sources here. Two different sources. Let me see here. All right. So now I was going to, so anyway, this was published 1882, two different sources. The other one was published 1890. So this one predates that source by 8 years. 8 years. So we have two sources saying that these are definitely Judah. And it says, during the flourishing days of the slave trade from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from a Judah, as the Portuguese called this place, which at the time had a population of 35,000. The titular deity of Witta is the snake, and the famous fetish temple is served by priestesses called mothers or sisters of serpents and recruited by the abduction of young girls on feast days. So some of them will tell you that it couldn't have been Israel because they worshiped a snake. And I would encourage you to go look up Nehushtan in the Bible. It was the brass serpent that Moses made that they began to worship. So snake worship isn't outside of Israel's history. But understand here, the Portuguese were calling them this. Why were the Portuguese calling them this? Because the Portuguese were the ones deporting Jews to West Africa. So, of course, they called it Judah. So now we still haven't established anything specific as to whether they were black or European. So let's continue. This book right here, brown.edu. So when the urban apologists come and say they debunked our sources, make sure you get the receipts that they debunked this document from brown.edu. Portuguese exploration to the west and the formation of Brazil, 1450 to 1800. So I went ahead and went down to page 17, brown.edu. You want to go down to page 17. You want to go to point 14 right here. Now listen to what happened to these people, and you tell me if you believe that European children did this. Just tell me if you think this makes sense happening off the west coast of Africa, where we just read that there were alligators and other beasts of prey. It says, by the year 1470, the Portuguese had found the equatorial island of Sao Tome. That's the same as St. Thomas in the Ghanaian Gulf off the African coast. The climate proved to be extremely unwholesome for Europeans, and settlement was slow. The official chronicler of King Jao II, that's King John, Garcia de Rezende, reports on one of the methods to populate this island that also throws some light on a tragic form of Jewish participation in the Portuguese Atlantic Empire. The king had allowed Jewish refugees from Spain, from where they had been expelled in 1492. Notice the consistency. She said we misinterpret history. To remain in Portugal only in return for payment of an enormous ransom. In 1493, those who could not pay had their children taken away from them, baptized by force, and deported to Sao Tome in order to be raised as Christians and to help populate the island that the king had just leased to Alvaro de Camina at the annual rent of 100,000 reis. Nothing is known of their further fate, although later chroniclers attribute the thriving sugar production on the island to the talents of those deported children and their offspring. So now she wants you to believe that white people were stripped butt naked, thrown in West Africa with alligators, beasts of prey, white children, and somehow survived to develop a thriving sugar economy. This is what the urban apologists want you to believe.
What do you think? Let me say this in closing. I'm going to continue on to find the truth. And the end of this year, I will be in Portugal, Spain, as well as in Morocco. And it's going to give me an awesome opportunity to connect, hopefully with some guides out there and historians, that we can unpeel the lie that has been told about those who were already settled in these countries, who were considered the Jews, who were dispelled and kicked out, where they were scattered on the islands and even on the coast of Africa. Stay tuned as I begin to show you more proof. This is your man, not your boy. Family, this is your man, not your boy, coming to you from Africa, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can kick it aside. So I want to share with this right here with my brother, Will, son of Yah, who has a YouTube channel. Check him out. That here again, with the books, the writings from many of these European writers, we find a history of how you became a Christian, how forcibly the Catholics snatched you out of being the chosen children of Israel into becoming Christians. And if you didn't convert, you died. So they figured it would be convenient to baptize you and bring you under the leadership of the Catholic Church or Christianity. Check this video out and I'll be back.
And now we're going to start to get into a little bit of the history of our people and what they went through. And we're going to bring that out from the Jews and the Moors in Spain on page 129. And we're going to just start at the top section. Read down, and it says the Jews and Moors in Portugal who were not the Jews and Moors in Portugal who would not profess the Christian religion to depart the kingdom. And he set a day after which if any of them were found there, they should forfeit their liberty. The boards immediately passed over into Africa. And as the Jews were preparing to depart, the king commanded that all their children who were not above 14 years old should be taken from their parents and educated in the Christian religion. It was the most affecting thing to see children snatched from the embraces of their mothers and fathers, embracing their children, violently torn from them, and even beat with clubs. To hear the dreadful cries they made, and every place filled with the lamentations and the yells of women. Many through indignation threw their sons into pits, and others killed them with their own hands. What added to the misery was that those who have gone over to Africa to avoid this evil were not suffered. For the king deferred giving them liberty of failing day after day. So, as you just read, our people went through violent acts. Our children were snatched from us, beat with clubs, threw into pits, and this and that, as we just read. All for what? Because we didn't want to convert to the Christian religion. This was what was going on right here is forced conversion. Us being forced into a religion that we never even practiced. A religion that we never even practiced. And you see why it's so easy for our people to cling on to Christianity. Because they've been doing this stuff in history. Let's continue on to learn more about this. The book is from Babylon. This next source is from Babylon and Timbuktu. And we're going to start up here. Top paragraph, second sentence, and it reads, in many cases, parents smothered their offspring in a farewell of their embrace. Could you imagine that? In others, they threw them into wells in order to save them from the disgrace and apostasy, and then killed themselves. Sometimes even old men were dragged to the church and forcibly baptized over overzealous fanatics. So our people would kill their children and themselves just so they would not convert over to this Roman Christian religion. Why would our people do that? Because these Christians were evil. It tells you right here that they were forcibly baptized over zealous fanatics. But these are Christians. These are supposed to be a Christ-like people. Yet they doing this to our people. Let's continue. Horrendous conditions like this, and even much worse, compel many Jews to escape secretly out of the country. These Black Jews went to Portuguese colonial possessions in Western Africa. Remember that the Portuguese colonies in Western Africa were Guinea, South Tome Island, Senegal, Angola, and a few islands near the African coast. Let's put this in perspective. Here's Senegal. Here's Guinea. Here's the Sao Tome Islands right here off the coast. And here's Angola. Just to put that to a little perspective, all along the West Coast. But let's continue with the reading. And it says, during the persecutions in Portugal, thousands of Jews left the country. The Jews were leaving the country in such a large number that in 1499 and 1531, the king published a decree forbidding the new Christians, known as Black Jews, from leaving Portugal without special permit. So we was trying to get out of that place so bad that we couldn't leave without a special permit. And they was known as new Christians because they was forcibly converted. New Christians, also known as Black Jews. Let's continue to build. At this time, the Jews became Christians out of fear. At this time, many Jews became Christians out of fear. Many of them were known as secret Jews practicing Judaism in secret under the guise of Christianity. Some writers call these Jews nominal Christians, Jews who are Christians in the name only, but practice Judaism in secret. So this is the type of things that people used to have to go through. We used to have to practice our true God in secret, at home, in a closet, in the dark, but embrace the wrong religion while we out in sight, around everybody, so we wouldn't be persecuted. What does this let us know? Jews became Christians out of fear. We become Christians nowadays out of straight brainwash and not knowing our history, or not knowing the history of these so-called Christians. Because if you knew the history of a Christian, you sure wouldn't want to be no Christian. These Christians are savages. They kill us. And they've been persecuting us. It ain't just started now, but let's continue. In spite of all the prejudices against the Black Jews of Portugal, they excelled in the trades, they excelled in all the trade skills, professions, and businesses. The wealth of the Jews was tremendous. Portugal is a small country about the size of a state of Florida. Nevertheless, in the year 1610, the Jews alone were worth 80 million ducats. The Jews dominated commerce and in the export trade. So naturally, the Black Jews would engage in commerce and trade in many parts of Africa after they fled from Portugal. So where our money at? Somebody got some money for us. The wealth of the Jews was tremendous. They excelled in trade, skills, professions, and businesses. The same thing we do today. So let's continue to build. The next source I have is from America, being an accurate description of the New World. We're going to start up here where it says the Portuguese that dwelt on the island informed the Netherlanders that few lived about 50 years there. Yet, notwithstanding the great gain tempt them to tarry, several of them having 200 or 300 Negroes that worked in the sugar mills, that John III, King of Portugal, sent a colony there above 200 years before, whom though the unwholesome air destroyed, yet the place was left desolate, for he sent new inhabitants, who first settled Guinea, next in Angola, and lastly on St. Thomas. That so they might be better used to the air. That the king sold all those Jews for slaves that refused to embrace the Roman religion and caused their children to be baptized, from whom most of the present inhabitants were descendants. So this source is letting us know that the king sold all the Jews for slaves that refused to embrace the Christian Roman religion and caused them to be baptized. So it's just showing you the wickedness of these people. We wouldn't convert to their religion, so guess what they did? They sold us or forcibly baptized us. or sent us off to different colonies or forced us to move. So it's just constant persecution during this time leading up to the slave trade. During this time leading up to the slave trade, we was forced to migrate to the west coast of Africa. We was either already there or we was sent to the west coast of Africa.
So what do you think? Let me say this in closing right here. You heard it. This is part 2. Let's go on to part 3. And then you're going to find me in the libraries over in Portugal and Spain and Morocco to even go more into, more into the story of who we are as a people, that we were basically rejected out of countries, pulled out of our faiths, brought into Christianity, and now we see we are lost children in a wild Western world that we are losing our everlasting mind. This is your man, not your boy.
Part of the reason why black churches don't teach this is because they don't want to get in the struggle either. They don't want to make it, quote unquote, racially motivated. People, this has nothing to do with racially oriented. I'm going to say that again. This has nothing to do with being racially oriented. This is biblical.
Amen.
I'm going to repeat that. This is biblical.
Amen.
These are biblical people. If they weren't, why are they in the Bible? If God didn't want you to see this, then why did he write it? He did it because it has to do with his story. I'm saying your forefathers, now walk with me, don't miss this. Because 98% of everybody out there believes that their roots starts in Africa. So they call themselves Black African Americans. And really what they should be talking themselves is they are what? The Hebrews and the Jews of the original temple of the city of David. And the Kente cloth that you find in this, that most black culture uses as African cloth is the center cloth that was used in Solomon's temple and his mobile moving tabernacle. So where did you get that cloth from? Moses' mobile moving tabernacle. How did Moses get it? Because he was married to Zipporah and also an Ethiopian woman, and etc. Now do you get the picture? Is this some good stuff? So you must take the people back past Africa, past Africa, past Africa. You got to get them back to the city of David and show them right here that your forefathers, the Queen of Sheba, was already in the city of David at the time of Solomon when the temple was being built. Oh, I don't know about you, but I can get excited about that. Whew, it's good stuff. I'm going to get this DVD. Can I get a witness of it? Amen. 1 Kings 3:1 and Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 5 and 6.
I am dark. Some versions say black, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not look upon me because I am dark, because the sun has tanned me.
So the priesthood, and then I turned to my black culture and I said, what? Your bloodline is priesthood? And no one told you that? I mean, like, not even one sermon with the Holy Ghost? Not one time. Everybody's there. I mean, like, it never even crossed their mind. Like, I should maybe just mention this. I want to ask you a question. Why, out of thousands and thousands of preachers, would not one in the Holy Ghost have the revelation could it be that the presence of this thing that happened in Africa maybe still has some influence that you forget your roots and not even be interested in it? So you wonder why you're hated. Because it's what's in your blood. See, you don't know who you are. And God wants to reveal it to you. But even as I'm telling you it, no offense. Can I just be friendly? Even as I tell the black culture this, it's like, don't bring it up. And so what I do with my big mouth, I bring it up. Why? Why should you be ashamed of your culture? I don't understand it. It's not in my logic. Well, you have to think about this, because sometimes we have an internal struggle because God's got a repositioning. But every culture God has, and I'm going to teach you, I'm going to share with you, every culture is in the Bible, just like this. But the reason we don't bring it up is because we have been brought up in a democracy/republic and a religion that doesn't want to discuss this because we fear what it will reveal. Because we're into controlling people instead of releasing people. Come on, everybody, amen?
Amen.
Praise Yahweh.
When Israel was a nation, they agreed to a set of covenant laws at Mount Sinai as part of a special contract with Yah. It meant that they were to be his people, and he would in turn be their Elohim. Now, as with all contracts, which usually involve at least two parties, in this case Yah and Israel, both parties were bound by certain agreements which were spelled out in the contract or covenant. The ancient people of Israel were told that if they obeyed the laws of the covenant, they would have Yah's protection and be showered with many blessings. If they disobeyed, they would receive punishment and suffer many curses. Sadly, our ancestors chose the latter, and following that fateful decision, the nation of Israel was thereafter thrust into a series of events that eventually resulted in a time of trouble and punishment whose ill effects are still felt to this very day.
$890. That's a good buy. $890.
Before long, ancient Israel experienced a civil war and eventually split into two kingdoms, with the tribe of Judah leading a two-tribe kingdom to the south and 10 tribes forming a kingdom to the north. After a period of self-rule, the independence of the northern kingdom was threatened by the Assyrians. We get that account in the book of 2 Kings.
Hoshea, son of Elah, began to rule over Israel in the 12th year of King Ahaz's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 9 years. He did what was evil in Yah's sight, but not to the same extent as the kings of Israel who ruled before him. King Shalmaneser of Assyria attacked King Hoshea, so Hoshea was forced to pay heavy tribute to Assyria. But Hoshea stopped paying the annual tribute and conspired against the king of Assyria by asking King So of Egypt to help him shake free of Assyria's power. When the king of Assyria discovered his treachery, he seized Hoshea and put him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded the entire land, and for 3 years he besieged the city of Samaria. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell, and the people of Israel were exiled to Assyria. They were settled in colonies in Halah, along the banks of the Habor River in Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. This disaster came upon the people of Israel because they worshipped other deities. They sinned against Yahweh Elohim, who had brought them safely out of Egypt and had rescued them from the power of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. They had followed the practices of the pagan nations Yah had driven from the land ahead of them, as well as the practices the kings of Israel had introduced.
This gives us a good picture of why the northern kingdom was punished by being exiled to Assyria. But later, Judah, which was the only kingdom left, also ended up doing that which was not right in the sight of Yah. 2 Kings chapter 24 informs us that the last independent king of Judah, Jehoiakim, reigned for 8 years, practicing evil before Yah unleashed the forces of Babylon on the kingdom of Judah, which ended in that nation being led away captive as well. 70 long years of captivity was experienced in Babylon, and the ancient Israelites witnessed the fall of that empire and the rise of the next. After the 70 years had expired, the new Persian king, Cyrus the Great, allowed the people of Judah to return to their homeland and rebuild. This event was recorded in the scriptures.
In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, Yah fulfilled the prophecy he had given through Jeremiah. He stirred the heart of Cyrus to put his proclamation in writing and to send it throughout his kingdom. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says. Yah, the Elohim of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem and Judah to rebuild this temple of Yah, the Elohim of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem. And may your Elohim be with you. Wherever this Hebrew remnant is found, let their neighbors contribute toward their expenses by giving them silver and gold, supplies for the journey, and livestock, as well as a voluntary offering for the temple of Elohim in Jerusalem.
That second temple was indeed rebuilt, and it existed until the time of Yeshua, who prophesied its ultimate destruction. Sadly, many of the people of Judah rejected Yeshua, as they failed to understand the many prophecies and types that pointed to him, such as those found in Exodus 12, verse 5, Zechariah 13, verse 6, Genesis 49, verse 10, Isaiah 7, verse 14, Micah 5, verse 2, and so many others. Yeshua highlighted their rejection of him in several parables. A notable one is the parable of the evil farmers, which can be found in Matthew 21, verses 33 to 46. And in it, Yeshua reveals what the rejection of the nation he was sent to would result in. Following the fulfillment of the parable of the evil farmers, wherein they murdered the son of the vineyard owner, that being Yeshua, and after the rejection of his emissaries, the fate of Judah and Jerusalem was pretty much sealed. Yeshua prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem and pointed to the future of the people of Judah, which was right in line with the curses of Deuteronomy 28.
And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that the time of its destruction has arrived. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. Those in Jerusalem must get out, and those out in the country should not return to the city. For those will be days of Elohim's vengeance, and the prophetic words of the scriptures will be fulfilled. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. For there will be disaster in the land and great anger against this people. They will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world. And Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end.
This particular prophecy, as you can see, stretched throughout time, with Jerusalem being controlled by the Romans, who were the first to march on her following Yeshua's prediction. Roman rule lasted for hundreds of years after the initial siege. Then the Romans eventually lost hold of Jerusalem to the Muslims. And thereafter, various caliphates controlled Jerusalem until the time of the Crusades. During this long period, popes allied with European kings to fight against Muslims.
The Crusades were first and foremost an expression of papal authority. against the enemies of the church.
The First Crusade was preached by a pope, Pope Urban II, in France in the year 1095. With reference to the Muslims and their advance in Europe and in Jerusalem, I think the Christians in Europe believed that the Islamic message of Muhammad was against and contradictory to what the Christians were saying. They were worried that this idea could possibly overrun the Christian idea.
Pope Urban conceived this idea. It's not a sin if you kill non-Christians, if you kill non-believers in our faith. And so he made this deal that if you go and fight in the Holy Land, you will be forgiven all your past sins. A knight could sin as much as he liked. And simply by going to the Holy Land, he had been given his passport to heaven. And that was an extremely attractive deal. And combined...
That's not the only thing these devils did. The Pope also lied to everybody didn't want to fight on behalf of the Christian invaders, the Christian crusaders. These people had slaves, which is called serfs, who worked the peasants. See, this is what they don't tell you historically. The peasants, how did they get the peasants to go conquer Jerusalem? Well, they told them that their loved ones didn't go to heaven when they passed on. And the Pope passed this message down to let the people know your loved ones, they got good news and bad news. The good news is that they're not in hell. They didn't go to hell. The bad news is they didn't go to heaven. They're in a place called purgatory. But guess what? If you go help us conquer Jerusalem, the Holy Land, then that will get your ancestors from purgatory. That's what purgatory is called. Look it up. That will get them from purgatory to heaven. That's how they played these people. So people start being willing to die to get their mother, their father, their daughter, their grandfather, their loved ones who had passed on out of purgatory. They had to trick people into going conquer Jerusalem.
And with that, he could win fame, he could win glory, and he could come back with the treasures of the Near East. These are the things that drew knights in their tens of thousands to go on crusade.
The bloodline of the Crusaders spread throughout the Islamic lands. Everybody heard stories about the massacre of unarmed individuals. It created this intense rage amongst Muslims. In a sense, it resulted in a new kind of Muslim crusade, a desire to raise an army to go back to liberate Jerusalem from the Crusaders as an act of piety on the part of Muslims.
I don't think any of those young men, either Christian or Muslim, could possibly have imagined that their struggle could possibly still be playing itself out 1,000 years later in the area that we call the Middle East today.
Following the Crusades, control of Jerusalem went from Mongol warriors to Egyptian Mamelukes to the Ottoman Empire, who surrendered Jerusalem to the British on December 9th, 1917. That event led to the modern-day circumstance, which allowed for the establishment of an Israeli state, which is currently occupied by Gentile posers pretending to be the people of Israel, as stated in Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, and chapter 3, verse 9. As prophesied by Yeshua, Jerusalem would be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. That means that Gentiles would be in Jerusalem, trampling it down till the very last day when Yeshua comes. In other words, the people in that land calling themselves Israel are really Gentiles. But let one of them tell you himself. In his book, The 13th Tribe, Arthur Kessler, himself a so-called Jew, writes in the very first chapter about the time when Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the West. The eastern confines of Europe between the Caucasus and the Volga were ruled by a Jewish state known as the Khazar Empire. At the peak of its power, from the 7th to the 10th centuries AD, it played a significant part in shaping the destinies of medieval and consequently of modern Europe. The country of the Khazars, a people of Turkish stock, occupied a strategic key position at the vital gateway between the Black Sea and the Caspian, where the great Eastern powers of the period confronted each other. It acted as a buffer protecting Byzantium against invasions by the lusty barbarian tribesmen of the northern steppes. But equally, or even more important, both from the point of view of Byzantine diplomacy and of European history, is the fact that the Khazar armies effectively blocked the Arab avalanche in its most devastating early stages, and thus prevented the Muslim conquest of Eastern Europe. It is perhaps not surprising, given these circumstances, that in 732, after a resounding Khazar victory over the Arabs, the future Emperor Constantine V married a Khazar princess. In due time, their son became the Emperor Leo IV, known as Leo the Khazar. Ironically, the last battle in the war, AD 737, ended in a Khazar defeat. But by that time, the impetus of the Muslim Holy War was spent. The Caliphate was rocked by internal dissensions, and the Arab invaders retraced their steps across the Caucasus without having gained a permanent foothold in the north, whereas the Khazars became more powerful than they had previously been. A few years later, probably AD 740, the king, his court, and the military ruling class embraced the Jewish faith, and Judaism became the state religion of the Khazars. No doubt their contemporaries were as astonished by this decision as modern scholars were when they came across the evidence in the Arab, Byzantine, Russian, and Hebrew sources. What is in dispute is the fate of the Jewish Khazars after the destruction of their empire in the 12th or 13th century. On this problem, sources are scant, but various late medieval Khazar settlements are mentioned in the Crimea, in the Ukraine, in Hungary, Poland, and Lithuania. The general picture that emerges from these fragmentary pieces of information is that of a migration of Khazar tribes and communities into those regions of Eastern Europe, mainly Russia and Poland, where, at the dawn of the modern age, the greatest concentrations of Jews were found. This has led several historians to conjecture that a substantial part, and perhaps the majority of Eastern Jews, and hence of world Jewry, might be of Khazar and not of Semitic origin. The large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, and thus perhaps mainly of Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, and that genetically they are more closely related to the Hun, Uyghur, and Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Tell me, what did you mean in the title of your book that the Jewish people had been invented?
It isn't a provocation. I meant it. I think that the Jewish people was invented, like the French people, like the Italian people. You see, to build nations in the modern times, historians started to build to the past peoples. Between these peoples, I think that in the second half of the 19th century, the Jewish people was invented.
Shlomo Sand, an Israeli emeritus professor of history at Tel Aviv University, wrote a book called The Invention of the Jewish People, in which he agrees with a lot of what Arthur Kessler brought forth concerning the Khazarian origins of the so-called Jews. Shlomo Sand, who is himself a so-called Jew, points out that the ancestry of most contemporary Jews stems mainly from outside the land of Israel, and they are descended from converts, and that mass conversions to Judaism occurred among the Khazars in the Caucasus, Berber tribes in North Africa, and in the Himyarite kingdom of the Arabian Peninsula. Yeshua said that a certain people would say that they are Jews but are not, and those people are the Khazars and their descendants who are among us today. And the fact that many sources can be found among these people which proclaim their true origins is astounding. On page 226 of his book, Sand writes, another early source attesting to the collective conversion of the Khazars is a Karaite one. In about 973 CE, one Yaakov Kerkasani, a scholarly traveler who was quite familiar with the regions around Khazaria, wrote a commentary in Aramaic on the verse, Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, Genesis 9:27. This is what the words mean. He will dwell in the tents of Shem, which grant him a favor and advantage. and some commentators think that this refers to the Khazars, who became Jews. What is interesting about the quote he cites and agrees with is the fact that they know and believe the prophecy concerning a people who would pretend to be of the tribe of Judah but are truly Gentiles. And they base this on Genesis 9 verse 27, which coincides with Revelation 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 9. What's more, most of the world is buying into this deception, and for the present day Khazarians, that's probably reason to celebrate. But getting back to Arthur Koestler on this subject, he writes, "The Jews of our times fall into two main divisions, Sephardim and Ashkenazim. The Sephardim are descendants of the Jews who since antiquity had lived in Spain until they were expelled at the end of the 15th century and settled in the countries bordering on the Mediterranean, the Balkans, and to a lesser extent in Western Europe. In the 1960s, the number of Sephardim was estimated at 500,000. The Ashkenazim, at the same period, numbered about 11 million. Thus, in common parlance, Jew is practically synonymous with Ashkenazi Jew. It should be mentioned that the Ashkenaz of the Bible refers to a people living somewhere in the vicinity of Mount Ararat in Armenia. The name occurs in Genesis 10 verse 3 and 1 Chronicles 1 verse 6 as one of the sons of Gomer, who was a son of Japheth. Ashkenaz is also a brother of Togarmah and a nephew of Magog, whom the Khazars, according to King Joseph, claimed as their ancestor. But worse was to come, for Ashkenaz is also named in Jeremiah 51 verse 27, where the prophet calls his people and their allies to rise and destroy Babylon.
Call thee upon the kingdoms of Ararat, Mini, and Ashkenaz.
This passage was interpreted by the famous Saadia Gaon, spiritual leader of Oriental Jewry in the 10th century, as a prophecy relating to his own times. Babylon symbolized the Caliphate of Baghdad, and the Ashkenaz who were to attack it were either the Khazars themselves or some allied tribe. So, as we have seen from the words of Arthur Koestler, historically, the Khazars and their descendants do not identify with Shem. But rather, they identify with Japheth. And that is proved out in their own writings. This is a major fulfillment of Scripture. All that being said, what happened to the real people of Judah in 70 AD? Following the siege and destruction of Jerusalem? The ones who weren't captured by the Romans and killed or enslaved escaped. But where did they go? First, you have to understand that whenever trouble arose, such as severe famine in the land, our forefathers and mothers were known to migrate in order to avoid it. There are three famous accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob heading south when famine struck at different periods in each of their lifetimes. Abraham and Jacob went all the way south to Egypt, but Isaac went as far as Gerar. And let's not forget Joseph and Mary, who also fled south to Egypt with Yeshua to escape trouble. These acts are all somewhat prophetic, as they are a major clue as to what happened to the people of Judah following the destruction of Jerusalem. In his book, From Babylon to Timbuktu, author and historian Rudolph R. Windsor, a true Hebrew, writes, "In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son, Titus, put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. After the fall of the Carthaginian metropolis in North Africa, Roman power became dominant in the Barbary states. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately, both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of Northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to the areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction, This was to the region of the South, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Windsor also tells us on page 86 and 87 that more descendants of Judah fled to the west coast of Africa in the 7th century after the Visigoths assumed power and began to suppress Hebrew customs with forced baptisms to Christianity. Windsor cites many credible sources to make his points. Among them is Joseph J. Williams, a 20th century historian who, in his 1930 book, Hebrewisms of West Africa, wrote, "Whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith and perhaps too in origin, long held sway south of the Sahara." Now, while Joseph Williams, who is Caucasian and Jesuit, does provide meaningful and factual info that pertains to the descendants of the ancient Hebrew Israelites, he does so with a degree of reluctance, and the book is written through the lens of what I would call a racist and white supremacist viewpoint. Because despite all the evidence of the true descendants of Judah and Israel as a whole being black, Williams and his sources try to brush that aside and conclude that white Jews, who they blindly claim are the originals, must have somehow lost their color by interbreeding with blacks who thereafter assimilated their culture, for which there is absolutely no evidence. That said, Hebrewisms of West Africa is full of valuable information as regards the wanderings of the Hebrews following the flight from Judea, and it also gives great insight into the further scattering of our ancestors, as certain customs practiced in West Africa by our Hebrew ancestors found their way to islands like Jamaica, Haiti, the Virgin Islands, and many other places following the slave trade. So, having fled their homeland as prophesied, there our ancestors were, charting new territory in Africa and trying to carry on their Hebrew traditions in a new land, but not as savages or uncivilized barbarians. In fact, Rudolph Windsor tells us in his book, "The Black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the Black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the autochthonous or native population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leatherworkers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, agriculturists, etc. The survivors of the Roman siege of Jerusalem were able to flee that terror and carry on in a new land. But the relative peace our ancestors were afforded by escaping to Africa was broken by the Arab slave trade, which affected not only Hebrews, but men, women, and children from many other peoples that were usually of the lowest classes. The Eastern Arab slave trade, in particular, involved women and young girls, and a strict ratio of 2 women for each man was maintained. The Arab slave trade, as horrible as it was, eventually gave way to something much worse with the arrival of the Portuguese. Portugal broke from Arab rule somewhere between the 12th and 13th centuries and slowly rose to power. Because of this small European country, slavery would soon go from including people of lower classes from different ethnicities to being forced mainly on so-called blacks from the tribe of Judah. In the early 15th century, Portuguese shipbuilding in Lisbon and Porto adapted to the times, and the result was the caravel, a light and fast aerodynamic vessel that allowed Portuguese mariners to travel south along Africa's Atlantic coast in order to reach the gold-producing regions of sub-Saharan West Africa. After establishing several trading posts and colonies in the region, other markets began to open up, such as the lucrative commerce in India, and overseas expansion resulted from Portugal's many trade networks. The Portuguese became heavily active in slave trading in Africa around 1445, after they discovered the Cape Verde Islands and settled there. Slavery was used to fuel their expanding empire, and slave trafficking became integral to their enterprise. When it became apparent that slavery was big business, a law had to be created to protect it. Thus, the sitting Pope, Pope Nicholas V, issued a papal bull, the strongest command of a pope, titled Romanos Pontifex, Latin for the Roman Pontiff. He issued the bull to King Alfonso V of Portugal on January 8, 1455, and it allowed the king to, and I quote, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This was basically a license and go-ahead for King Alfonso, who alone was personally named in the papal bull, to send vessels to search out, capture, vanquish, subdue, and enslave Hebrews, particularly the people of Judah, whose existence, kingdom, and territory they were well aware of. The people of Judah were their primary concern, in fact, and they are the so-called Negroes who were rounded up and scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, just as Yeshua said they would be, back in Luke 21, verse 24.
They will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world.
And this also coincides with the curse of Deuteronomy 28, verse 64.
For Yah will scatter you among all the nations, from one end of the earth to the other.
When I say they were aware of who Judah was, I'm not conjecturing. Proof is in the record. If you do a Google search and type in a new and accurate map of Negro land, a list of results will pop up. As of the date of this recording, Swain.com still works. Click on it and a page will open up showing a 1747 map of West Africa by 18th century English map engraver Emmanuel Bowen. And then click on the image of the map itself. Move your mouse pointer to the area that is now present-day Ghana and click on it to enlarge the map. Click it again and you will clearly see that what is now called Ghana was once the slave coast, which the map maker labeled the Kingdom of Judah, dropping the H at the end. This is where many of the people of Judah were shipped from, like sardines in a can. Yet today, the elites and their paid professors would have you believe that we are Africans or Hamites, when in truth we are Shemites. They themselves know this to be a fact. In Zondervan's Compact Bible Dictionary, for instance, the definition for Ham reads as follows. Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. They say not the Negroes because Shem is the progenitor or father of the Negroes. Though both lines are comprised of so-called blacks, Africans and so-called African Americans are not the same. We are Hebrews and they are Hamites. But there are still many Hebrews in Africa, however. But getting back to our history, despite the papal bull pertaining solely to the King of Portugal, that didn't stop other empires and nations from getting in on the action. Over the centuries, Spain, Britain, France, the Dutch, Canada, the United States, and many African countries participated in the transatlantic slave trade, and this fulfills certain prophecies, such as Psalm 83, which I urge you to read with your eyes open, and Joel 3, verse 6.
You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, so they could take them far from their homeland.
The sad fact is, Psalm 83 is still in full effect, as our collective enemies are still conspiring to keep us in the dark as concern our true identity, and they continue to miseducate us. They really mean to wipe out the memory of the people of Israel from the face of the earth. But Yah is not going to let that happen. And this documentary is merely one step toward that effort. The present situation we are in is solely due to our forefathers failing to keep the covenant law of Yah, and it falls to us in this generation to right that wrong. And Yah said that this would happen in our day.
But I will spare some, for some of you will escape the sword when you are scattered among the lands and nations. Then in the nations where you have been carried captive, those who escape will remember me. how I have been grieved by their adulterous hearts, which have turned away from me, and by their eyes, which have lusted after their idols. They will loathe themselves for the evil they have done and for all their detestable practices, and they will know that I am Yah. I did not threaten in vain to bring this calamity on them.
You see, we, the people of Israel, are not born deserving of that name. We are born as Jacobs or supplanters and schemers. But to truly earn the right to be called Israel, we, like our father Jacob, will have to be faithful and wrestle with Yah until we are overcomers. Those of us who do this will be the ones who will truly be called Israel and form the remnant of the kingdom. Having said that, please don't let this be the end of your search for truth on this subject. Continue to dig for it and pray that Yah gives you discernment, since a great deal of deception is out there regarding this topic. And spread the word to your friends and family, and he or she that has ears to hear and eyes to see among them will get it. I hope that this brief history has enlightened you and brought a degree of understanding as concerns our past, which goes well beyond Africa. The so-called Negroes, blacks, and African Americans are actually the descendants of the people of Judah, and that is something they don't want us to know.
Do not buy 12 Tribes on Earth hair growth oil and hair magic elixir unless you want super healthy, gorgeous hair that grows. They have a whole line of amazing hair growth products, including hair growth leave-in conditioner spray, hair growth shampoo, hair growth spray, and hair growth butter. I'm starting to sense a theme here. They include quality natural ingredients. They smell amazing, and you can see the results for yourself. So if you're looking for healthy hair growth for your natural or relaxed hair, try 12 Tribes on Earth today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I went to Chat GPT to find out who are the real Hebrews and what did they look like. And I was surprised I did not get a whitewashed answer. But I'm going to let you judge by the answer that it gave. So we know there are so many falsehoods told today about who the real Hebrews are. And despite the fact that it's in the biblical text, there are still people that want to misrepresent who the real Hebrews are. So let's get to the answer that came from Chat GPT.
The real Hebrews of the Bible, the ancient Israelites, were a non-European Afro-Asiatic people with clear African and Middle Eastern roots. Here's a historical, biblical, and linguistic breakdown of their racial and ethnic identity. 1. The Hebrews were Afro-Asiatic people. The ancient Israelites descended from Abraham, who came from Ur of the Chaldees in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Over time, they settled in Canaan, modern-day Israel, Palestine, lived in Egypt for centuries, and had deep interactions with Ethiopia, Kush, and other African regions. This means they were black-skinned, Shemitic-speaking people, not white Europeans, closely related to other Afro-Asiatic groups, including ancient Egyptians, Canaanites, Cushites, Aramaeans, Nubians, Ethiopians. 2. Biblical clues point to a non-white people. Examples. Moses was mistaken for an Egyptian, Exodus 2:19. Egyptians were African and dark-skinned. Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him in Egypt, meaning he looked like the locals. Genesis 42:8. The Israelites were often compared or connected to Cushites, who were from modern-day Sudan, Ethiopia. Jeremiah 13:23, Numbers 12:1. Solomon had love for the Queen of Sheba, a powerful African queen. 1 Kings 10. Jesus fled to Egypt as a child to blend in. Matthew 2:13-15. Unlikely if he looked Northern European. 3. Historical and genetic evidence. DNA and archaeological evidence suggests the ancient Israelites shared genetics with other Levantine and North African populations, not with modern Europeans. Black communities, like the Lemba of Zimbabwe, have oral traditions and even genetic links to ancient Israelite tribes. The Igbo of Nigeria, Beta Israel of Ethiopia, and other African groups have long held Hebrew traditions, which many scholars believe are ancient and legitimate. 4. Modern confusion comes from colonization and racism. During slavery and colonialism, European powers rewrote biblical imagery, portraying Hebrews, Jesus, and prophets as white people to maintain cultural dominance. Renaissance paintings, Hollywood films, and church stained glass windows falsely presented a whitewashed version of Scripture. This was never historically accurate and served to disconnect African-descended people from their heritage. Conclusion. The real Hebrews of the Bible were Black people from Northeast Africa and the Middle East, not white Europeans. They lived, worshipped, and journeyed through regions that are today known as Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Sudan, Iraq, and Ethiopia. Their identity was deeply Afro-Asiatic, and their legacy has often been erased, distorted, or whitewashed in modern media and religion.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the answer it gave. I was not looking for it to be 100% accurate. After all, it is AI. So there's going to be some discrepancies here and there. But one thing it did not whitewash the answer,
Exposed the impossible over there.
where it tried to include almost everyone on earth as who the real Hebrews are. It didn't do that. It didn't give the Christian answer or the color don't matter kind of answers. It gave really an answer that I guess I was not expecting. But you're going to have to judge how you feel about this answer. But one thing I can say, the kind of things that are coming out of Chat GPT is less flawed than I thought. I thought some of the answers would kind of be ambiguous, where it wouldn't really give an answer, but something vague. But it really hasn't been vague at all, which is shocking. Because under any other circumstances, or if you just typed in who the real Hebrews are just in the search engine, you're going to get kind of murky kind of answers. Not unless it's some website put up by our people, then it would be more accurate. But if it's not, it's going to be kind of murky, like they're kind of giving you half truths and things of that nature. But tell me what you think. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't.
Cool figure. Follow me.